Welcome back, guys, to Horror Valley. Tonight I'm sharing 12 true, deeply disturbing encounters from the Deep Appalachian Mountains. Roads that vanish behind you. Whispers in the laurel that sound like family. But before we continue, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe and don't forget to like and share. Now let's begin. You ever hear a mountain sing when it has no reason to? I have. It was not music the way folks mean it. It was a sound that came up through the rock and into your teeth. It made my jaw buzz and my chest feel hollow, like I'd swallowed a storm and it was trying to get back out. It started in a narrow cut above our family place where our ridge breaks into a crooked little valley that folks around here call a holler. My cousin Tate and me were running a line of old logging road, looking for chanterelles after a rain. It was late, with that blue light that comes just before the mountain lets go of the day. We were cutting back through a laurel hell when we heard it. A low hum, steady as a fridge, colder than creek water. Tate stopped so fast I bumped into him. "Hear that?" he whispered. "That's not a creek," I said. "That's in the ground." We stood still and listened. The hum had a sort of beat to it, like it was counting. 2 long, 1 short. It was not bees. It was not anything I had heard up there. It made the leaves on the laurel tremble like a slow wind was under them. We pushed through the thicket and stepped into a little open place where the slope had slumped years back. At the far side was a wall of rock, damp and dark, with old timbers laid across a gap like a mouth. The wood looked sunk and swollen, black with age. I thought mine entrance at first, but the way the stone curved made my stomach go strange. Mines are square and cut. This was round and smooth like a throat. "Who put those logs there?" Tate asked. "Somebody who did not want to hear it sing," I said, and I was only half joking. The hum was stronger standing there. I felt it in my molars. When I put my hand on the rock, it pushed back gentle, like it had a pulse of its own. The air smelled like iron and cold clay and a faint sweet that made me think of violets. We should have left it alone. That is simple to say here, telling this. Up there, with the light going and the sound sliding through bone, leaving felt worse than staying. The timbers were rotten. We pried them loose and pulled 2 aside. Cold air poured out so fast it made my eyes water. The hum rose a notch, and I swear the leaves all around tilted toward the opening like they wanted to see. We had our little lamps from the truck in our packs. We clipped them on and crawled in. We made jokes about snakes to cover the fear. The roof dipped low at first. We crabbed along on hands and knees. The rock under us was slick, but not with water. It had a soft give under the hard, like there was something living pressed down in there. I told myself it was mud. The hum was inside the tunnel now, not just coming at us. It settled behind my eyes and made my breath line up with it without me trying. When I spoke, the sound of my words got swallowed whole and came back dull, like the mountain chewed them. Tate said, "You hear it say your name?" "No," I lied. We came to a place where the roof went up and we could stand. Our light threw long shadows over the walls. There were marks in the dark stone. Not tools, fingers. Like someone had pressed their hands and dragged them until the skin came off. The black there had a shine to it I do not want to think about. On the ground were old prints, boot tread gone smooth. They went inward only. None came back out. "Folks been here," Tate said, and he said it like a dare. "They came in and came back." "Maybe they did," I said, but my voice did not sound like mine. At the far end of that little chamber was a slit. It was narrow, like someone had pushed a blade through the mountain and left a wound. The hum was strongest there. When I set my hand on the edge to lean and look, the stone felt warm, like the inside of a mouth. There was a shallow pool at our feet. The water trembled to the beat. I shined my light and saw hair caught in a skim of slime. Human hair, dark and fine. I pulled my hand back and wiped it on my jeans, and my palm came away red where the hum had rubbed it raw. Tate had a rope. He always carried one for crossing low spots or pulling deer. He tied it around his waist. "I will squeeze through and see if it opens up," he said. 2 tugs if it is good, 3 if I am stuck. "That is stupid," I said. "We should mark it and come back with more light at least." He grinned that nervous grin he had when he was about to do the thing anyway. "You always said I do not finish anything. I am finishing this." He slid into the slit. The rock took him slow, easing around his ribs. The hum rose. I braced my boots and held the rope. It felt dry and right in my hands at first. Then it felt damp. Then it felt warm. The line twitched. Once, twice. Then a long, slow pull that did not fit our plan at all. It felt like somebody on the other end did not know how to be a person. I pulled back. The hum sank low and almost stopped. It made my heart stumble. "Tate?" I called. "You good?" A voice answered, close, right behind my ear. "Come on in." It was my grandmother's voice, who has been in the ground 10 years. I spun with the light. There was no one. The pool moved like something big rolled just under the skin. My beam landed on my reflection, and for a second there was a second face next to mine. It did not have features. It was the idea of a face drawn wrong in the water. The rope went slack. Then it crept through my hands on its own, inch by inch, careful as a snake. I locked it around my wrist. The knot we tied to Tate slid back to me, neat and clean, like it had never been tied to anything at all. The end of the rope was wet, but not with water. The hum stopped. The mountain held its breath. All at once the dark felt thick. In that silence, my own breath sounded loud. Then it did not. I was breathing, but I could not hear it. The walls shivered like skin. A smell came out that I knew. Creek mud, sun on old laundry, a little violet soap my mother used, the kind of things you only smell at home. The rope tightened. It tugged me forward, gentle at first, then stronger. The pool lifted like a chest filling. I saw pale things under the water that had no business being there. I planted my boots and pulled back, but the floor under me gave like a lung. The whole mountain took a breath in and took me with it. I went forward without meaning to. The slit let me in like a mouth taking a sip, and the rock around my ribs pressed and eased, the same slow rhythm as the hum. My lamp threw a wobbling oval of light that kept smearing, as if the air was thick enough to bend it. The rope around my wrist inched deeper with me, slick as eel skin, warm like it had been sitting on a windowsill in July. I could not breathe right. I was breathing, but the sound of it was wrong, thin and fluttering like a paper bag. The smell in there was not rot. It was iron and dampness, and that same faint violet soap my mother had used to rinse sheets. That smell made me want to lie down, even though everything in me was screaming to back out. The slit widened and dropped, and I slid on my belly into a space that felt open but not empty. The walls bulged and sank like a slow tide. My lamp shook so bad I had to hold it with both hands. The beam found the floor. It was not stone. It was a skin of hard-packed clay that lifted, then settled, lifting just enough to make your balance argue with your bones. I turned and tried to pull myself back toward the slit. The rope went tight at once, not from ahead, but from under my skin. I felt the tug not in my hand, but in the place where my wrist meets my palm, a sore, threaded feeling. I swore out loud. I pushed a thumb under the loop to loosen it, and the rope flexed like a living muscle and did not let me. 2 tugs if it's good, 3 if I'm stuck, Tate had said. The rope gave me 2 small, neat tugs from inside my wrist. I froze and bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. The hum moved through that taste and made it sweet. There were things scattered where the wall met the floor, as if the place had hiccuped and spit them halfway out. A button smooth with handling, a coin green as moss, a glove with 3 fingers turned inside out. Hair drifted in the curve of the wall in long, dark streamers. When my light slid over the hair, it shied away a little, like grass when a wind comes from nowhere. "Buddy?" Tate's voice came from ahead. It sounded small and far away, like it was in a pipe. "Don't pull me." "Where are you?" I called. The rock took my words, chewed, gave them back a second late, thin and mean. "Don't pull me," he said again, more pleading this time. "It remembers." I put my hand to the bulging wall. It was warm and slick with a skin of cool sweat. My fingers found dents in it, smooth cups where other fingers had pushed and pressed until they wore spots into the flesh of the stone. In the center of one cup was a pearl of something white. I told myself it was quartz. When I touched it, it was soft as a milk tooth. The hum changed. It got happy. That is the only word I have. The beat picked up like a heart when you see a porch light after a long road. The roof above me lowered a touch and then lifted, and I saw in that lift a face roll up under the thin skin. It did not have eyes or a mouth you could trust, but it had the position of them, and the nose was a little crooked the way Tate E.S. had been since we were 13 and he ran into a swing. "Don't," that not face said, but the sound came from my left, from the slit, from my own chest. "Don't pull me, it will bite down." I could not keep from pulling. Fear made my body dumb. I dug my heels into the clay and leaned back on the rope. The loop around my wrist burned. The wall swelled like a breath held too long, and under the skin something big shifted quick. There was a sound like a wet branch breaking. Hot wind hit my face. The knot face flattened and smoothed away into the wall like a hand steps into a glove. I yanked with everything I had. The rope went slack, and then whipped my arm so hard my shoulder popped. I fell on my back and slid. The floor tilted. The whole chamber exhaled. It did not push me out so much as roll me along its tongue. I hit the slit sideways, scraped the skin off my hip, and the stone squeezed me through like it had decided I was not worth the trouble. I burst into that first little chamber and slammed into the pool. The water closed over my face, and there was nothing sweet in it now. It tasted like pennies and mildew and hot rope. I came up blind and gagging, and the hum fell back to that small, steady thing that fits behind the ears. It was almost gentle again, as if to say, "See, nobody got hurt, nobody but Tate." I scrambled for the light and found it by my knee and threw it at the slit like a rock. It bounced and wobbled and settled so the beam slit the opening sideways. I waited for a shadow to cut the light. I waited for 2 tugs on the rope from the other end. The rope in my hand lay quiet and warm. The knot that had gone to Tate was gone again. In its place, the loop around my wrist was under the skin. I mean that plain. The rope had fed itself through me while I slid, and now the last 3 inches showed at the surface like a healed piercing, slick with that sweet violet-smelling sweat. I crawled backward to the timbers and into the laurel, and I did not stand until I was out of sight of the hole. The mountain had its evening face on by then, that blue look that makes distances long. The hum followed me a while, soft, not chasing so much as watching. I went home. I washed my arm until the skin was raw, and the loop under my wrist stayed put. I slept on the couch with a knife in my hand, and I dreamed that my mother hung the sheets and they filled like lungs, and when she patted them flat, the cloth left handprints on her palms. I did not tell the sheriff. I did not tell anyone the whole of it. Folks went up next day to look for Tate. They came back saying there was nothing up there but sunk timbers and old rock, and maybe he had run, and maybe he had just slipped off somewhere else. I nodded and said, maybe. I kept my mouth shut when the hum tickled my molars while they talked. Every night that week, when the house went quiet and the crickets got slow, I felt it. 2 little tugs from the place my hand meets my wrist. Not from outside, from down in the meat. 2 tugs means it's good. Sometimes just after, the floorboards under my couch will lift and settle like someone breathing slow and deep right under the joists, learning to match me. Right now, while I'm telling you this, the loop under my skin is warm, and I can smell violets, and it is giving me 2 small tugs, and I can't tell if they are asking me to come back or if they are coming from me. There is a bend on our mountain road that adds a turn when the fog gets low. That is how folks tell it, with a shrug like it is just one more weird thing the hills do. They call it the switchback with no bottom. I thought that was a tall tale made to scare city drivers. Until I worked the night a car went missing at mile 7 and I kept meeting my own tire tracks. I volunteer with the fire department and do odd jobs for the county, so they call me when a car limps to a stop on the steep grade and there is no tow free. I have a small truck with a winch and a set of flares and a radio that only signs on with the next ridge if the weather is kind. The switchback sits above a hollow full of laurel. In summer it smells like hot pine and creosote. In fall it smells like wet leaves and the metal taste of brakes. There is a yellow sign with a bent arrow nailed to a post so many times it looks like a bruise. It was past midnight when the call came. A breathless voice said a vehicle had lost power just below the third turn. Hazard lights were flashing. The caller said he saw a shape on the inside edge, and then his call cut in and out with a hiss like water on a hot pan. I promised I was on my way and dropped a note for my sister. She said, "Take your time," which in our family always means come back. The fog on the grade that night was the kind that sits on the road like wool. It ate my headlight beams and gave them back in short yellow knives. The reflective paint lines looked wet and too bright like eyes. The radio gave me the same safe driving advice twice, word for word, with the same laugh at the end like someone on the other side forgot they had already spoken. I shut it off and rolled the window down to listen to the mountain breathe. You can hear the switchback before you see it. Gravel ticks against the guardrail where the slope drops away. There is a drain that gulps water even when the sky is clear. I came up on the first curve and saw the wooden cross on the bank with fresh silk flowers tied to it. My cousin died there 11 years ago in a deer strike that became a roll. The way the cross leans makes it look like a man who got tired halfway through standing. I nodded at it like I always do and told myself the third turn was only 2 breaths away. The grade steepened. The guardrail lit up under my headlights like a silver bone. There were skid marks near the inside edge, new, cutting dark through the dew. They went the wrong direction, like someone had braked going uphill. My tires hummed on the paint as I hugged the lane and felt the back end get light and settle again. I set a flare at the start of the bend and the flame burned with a tight, bright center that looked a little green, like a promise you could not quite trust. The road past the first bend gave me the second, tight and hard, with the inside bank rising like a wall of wet dirt and the outside dropping into a dark that looked like a mouth. The fog made ghosts of the firs. The painted arrow sign on the post had a new nail in it. When I passed, the head of the nail looked like an eye that tracked me. I told myself I was only tired. My map app showed my pin crawling in a loop over itself. Then it stalled and thought for too long. The altimeter stuck at the same number for a full minute while the engine note changed and my ears popped. I went by a patch of cracked pavement with a pothole shaped like a boot heel, and then I went by the same patch again. I know it because I remember how the tar line crossed it like a stitch. I keyed the radio back on and called out, "This is County Rescue. If you can hear me, flash your lights." The mountain held my words in its hand and then squeezed, and I got my own voice back half a second late, thin and far, with a small change I hated, like a person doing an impression of me. Then up ahead around the next hairpin, hazard lights blinked, 2 red squares beating a slow, tired rhythm. I felt the relief like a pain. I rolled to a stop and kept my engine running. The fog made halos around the red pulses. I put on my hazard lights so they would see me and my flash matched theirs in time, beat for beat. I thought that was funny until the hair on my arms lifted. There is no reason 2 different flashers should fall into step for more than a second unless someone wants them to. I got out with a flare and the wet air hit my face. The other car was pointed the same way I was, half on the inside gravel, half in the lane. Its taillights were my taillights. Same make, same year. Same little dent under the left light from backing into the trout hatchery fence 2 summers ago. There was even my sticker in the back window, the faded one of a fish skeleton that only folks from our valley ever buy. I walked along the driver's side with my hand out like you do when a dog might bite. The air smelled like hot break and old paper. The fog moved like breath. The window glass showed my shape in ghost colors and showed the road behind me in strands of yellow and red. The door was locked. The engine sound was my engine sound. Inside the cab, a phone buzzed with a text that matched mine, the same tone. It vibrated against the console with a little angry bee noise I knew too well. The radio in my truck popped and gave a voice like mine saying, "You there?" from behind me on the grade. I leaned to the glass and cupped my hands to look in. The driver lifted his head and turned, slow, and I saw my own face where it should not be. Pale in the glow, lips moving to a timing I did not own. As the switchback bent, the road left again and my own hazard lights answered me from the fog. I held the flare low so the smoke wouldn't choke me. The red light washed the glass. Moisture on the window bloomed like breath. Words drew themselves in the fog on the inside of the other truck's window. My name came first, slow, like a fingertip writing from the wrong side. Then 3 words. You there yet? Hey, I said, and my voice shook. You okay? The face in the driver's seat turned more toward me. It was me. Same cut on the eyebrow from the time I fell into the river rocks. Same mole on the cheek I always forget I have. But the smile didn't belong to me. It sat a little too wide, like a mask that didn't fit. His lips moved, and when the sound came, it was through my radio behind me, half a second late. You okay? The radio said in my voice, thin as if the air had to squeeze. I tried the handle. Locked. The driver raised his hand and laid it to the glass, palm to palm with me only half a beat after. My skin tingled where it lined up with mine through the cold. His hazard lights kept pace with mine, like a heartbeat I could not slow. The fog rolled, and a soft, steady drip hit the pavement from the drain. It sounded like a clock in a drowned room. Something shifted in the fog behind him, back where the bench seat would be. A shape leaned forward like a person waking from sleep and deciding against it. My stomach went cold. I'm going to hook a line to you, I said. We'll get off the grade. He nodded, late. His mouth made the same words without sound. Then he said, soft. And I knew the words before he said them because I never forget the way my sister says things. Take your time. That was her voice in my mouth, slid through his. I went to my truck. The winch cable clattered as I pulled it free. The steel had that oily feel I hate. My own hazard lights lit the fog red, and the other pair answered in the same rhythm, like we were clapping together at a song I didn't to know. I dragged the hook under the bumper of the other truck. The plate stared at me. It was my plate, only backward, like a mirror threw it back wrong. When my fingers touched the metal, it felt warm. I clipped the hook to his toe point, stood up, and every hair on my neck lifted. Back at my truck, the cable made a soft, tight hum, like a note someone holds low under their breath. I hit the switch. The spool began to pull. The line went straight between my bumper and his. The fog pulled too, as if the road was breathing in. Then my truck lurched forward an inch. My stomach jumped. I stomped the brake. The line sang a higher note. I looked. The hook was on my bumper. It was on both. The same hook, the same line. The cable ran from me to me and tightened like a belt. When the spool pulled, I was pulling myself. I hit the release. The motor whined, freed the drum, but the line kept moving like something else had a switch I couldn't see. My radio crackled and I heard a laugh that was mine, but not the way I laugh. I got you, it said. I yanked the plug on the winch remote. The motor died. The line kept its slow, steady creep. My feet slid a half-inch on wet paint. I threw open the door and leaned hard on the brake with one foot and set the parking brake with my hand. I could feel the road under me go soft like wet wood under paint. Stop! I shouted at the fog. The other me shouted late, a weak echo. It made my words feel dumb and small. I grabbed the flare and ran to the front again. The line hummed high now, angry. I jammed the burning stick under it and let the heat eat at the steel for a second. Not that it would cut, just to make it mad. The flare spit and went green at the tip like a sick sparkler and died. Behind the glass, the other me leaned close. He opened his mouth and fog poured out slow and thick. When it thinned, he was saying something. I read it on my own lips. When you get to the fourth turn, don't look down, he mouthed. The sound came through the radio behind me like a whisper from a drain. I didn't think. I vaulted into my cab and threw it in low. The line groaned. The hook jumped. The cable slithered off the bumper like a snake that had forgotten me. I turned the wheel hard into the bank, not toward the lane. Dirt hit the fender. The inside ditch gashed my tires with rocks. I feathered the gas and crept along the ditch, hugging the mountain's ribs. Flares burned behind me and in front of me. Too many. Red spun in the fog like eyes. I refused the next painted line. The sign with the bent arrow leaned wrong, as if it wanted to point me back to the same place. I cut across the lip of the curve and climbed the low bank where folks tossed beer cans. The truck scraped. Something under me shrieked, metal on stone. I pushed until the nose lifted and the tires bit clay. The ditch gave me to a rough pull-off I didn't know. A narrow, rutted strip that cut straight up like a goat path to an old spur. When I hit that spur, the fog dropped away fast. Not like wind took it, more like someone let go. I rolled to a stop with my brakes hot and got out. Below me, the switchbacks lay stacked like white ribs in the gloom. The fog filled the hollow and turned slow. A bowl of milk stirred with a finger. Down inside it, taillights blinked. Dozens. Pairs of red that pulsed together in one slow rhythm. Most were my truck. Some were not. I saw a square shape that looked like a station wagon from the 80s. I saw a small car with a rust hole in the hatch. Their lights winked from deeper and deeper, a spiral that had no end. My radio hissed. "You there?" It said in my voice, and then another voice under it, a breathless one I had heard on the first call, said, "I can't find the edge." I lit one last flare. The red bled through my fingers. I held it over the drop and let it fall. It went down slow as if the air was honey. It should have hit in 2 seconds. It fell long past that. When it finally struck something, the sound came back thin and far, like metal finding metal in a place without walls. The red down there answered, and all the hazards blinked once together like a nod. I got back in and took the logging spur all the way to the ridge. I didn't look down. I didn't glance at the mirror. When I hit the blacktop, my altimeter on the dash came back to life and gave me a number that made sense again. The grade behind me looked like any curve on any road in any mountain. They never found the car from that night. They said I must have chased a reflection and panicked. They said fog does tricks. I nodded. I stopped taking calls after dark for a while. I parked my truck with the nose toward the barn doors and the hazard switch taped down so I won't hit it by accident. But some nights the red light still washes my bedroom wall in a slow, steady pulse, even with the truck cold and dead. It matches my heartbeat until mine starts to match it. Then the radio in the kitchen wakes and clicks once. My sister texts me, just a picture of the curve. Fresh flowers on the leaning cross, and in the reflection on the road, a hint of my taillights bending left around a turn that isn't there. I did not go up Black Balsam to hunt. I went because my sister asked me to carry her husband's old compass to the place he loved and leave it there. He died in town, not up on the balds, but he always said the ridge put his lungs right. He said the wind up there felt new, like you could start over if you let it in deep enough. I thought a compass on a rock was a simple way to say thank you. I started late, with that thin gold light that makes the blueberry bushes look like embers. The air smelled like fir pitch and cold stone. The spruce up there are stunted and dark, like old men with their heads bent. The trail is mostly open, round knobs of grass and rock with the sky right on your forehead. Every step feels louder with no trees to hold your sound. I had heard the story of the white stag since I was a kid. Folks say if you see it on Black Balsam, you keep your voice in your mouth. You do not point, you do not call, you do not follow. You back away nice and slow and let whatever is wearing that shape keep going where it is going. I saw it without seeing it at first. The wind stopped. Crickets quit. Even the little squeak the blueberries make when your pant leg brushes them went quiet. Something stood on the next rise, still as a post. I thought it was a quartz boulder the moon had decided on early. Then it turned its head and a line of pale moved like water. I wanted to think albino buck. I wanted a clean story. It was white the way an old sheet gets white, where the light sits in it and never comes back out. The coat looked soft from far off, but when my light grazed it, the hair was wrong. It lay in grain like grass laid by a flood. The antlers were tall and wide, and had that velvet look even though it was late. Thin white threads hung off them like the shedding of something that had not decided what to be. It stepped, and the sound of that step came from behind me. I turned, and there was nothing there but the grass bending where I had just walked. I turned back, and the stag was closer by 3 strides without having crossed the space. Its eyes were not the green or red you get in a deer. They held their own light like a little pane of day in a night face. It smelled like ice and old pennies and spruce sap. My mouth filled with water I did not want. The compass in my pocket felt heavier. The brass warmed under my palm like a pressed coin. For a second I thought about throwing it away. For a second I thought I was already doing what it wanted. It moved again with no space in between. It was 10 feet off, standing on the trail like it had paid for the right. Its antlers were tangled with a scrap of blue. It was a piece of bandana I knew. I saw that same blue on my brother-in-law in every fishing picture we have. He wore it to keep the sweat out of his eyes. He lost it up there the summer he proposed to my sister, and we laughed that the ridge had taken a tithe. "Easy," I said, because fear makes you talk to things like they are dogs. My voice felt thick in my throat, like breath had turned to syrup. The wind did not carry the word. It fell short and sat down between us like a coin. The stag lowered its head, slow and careful, and the blue scrap almost brushed my knee. I did not want to touch it. I did not want to let it go. I reached without meaning to. My fingers were 2 inches from that clean, cold velvet and the scrap of bandana. I saw knots tied in the threads. I saw hair caught there too. Gray, black, a bright orange one like the nylon from a safety cap. They were knotted with care. They were knotted tight. I heard a little click inside its chest. It sounded like 2 stones tapped together underwater. It breathed out, and I saw frost leave its mouth even though the grass was warm against my ankle. The frost drifted around my legs and sat there like fog that had made up its mind to be heavy. It turned and walked and did not go anywhere I could see. The trail turned with it the way a floor will turn if a room wants you in another corner. The balds felt flatter and then not flat at all. The sky leaned. The spruce seemed closer. I took 1 step and found my boot in a hoof print so deep the dirt was black and wet at the bottom. The print did not fit a deer. It was wider. It had little crescents inside it like small mouths had taken sips from the edge. "Come on," a voice said from the stag's direction, soft and ordinary, the way my brother-in-law used to get me to take his side carrying a canoe. He always said it low, joking, asking for a little help. It was not his voice if you listened. It was his voice if you remembered. The antlers tilted like a man dipping his hat. The tips brushed my sleeve. They were colder than the wind had any right to be. Fine white threads unwound a little. They stuck to my jacket with the tack of spider silk. When I tried to pull back, the silk pulled back with me and made a sound too small for ears, like someone licking a stamp. I looked down at my boot. The hoof print had deepened by itself. It went from a shallow pool to a cup and then to a hole. I saw wet root and something pale. It was not stone. It was the curve of a rib the size of a shovel handle. The dirt around it was not dirt. It was hair laid flat the way flood lays hay. The stag lifted its head as if to clear its nose. The blue scrap fluttered without wind. I felt another tug at my sleeve, like a friend catching you by the coat and saying, "Please, this way." I stepped because not stepping felt rude, and the ground under me did not say ground at all. It sank and sighed and gave like a mattress too old to hold a shape. Something in the hole clicked its teeth together, soft and happy. And the stag looked back at me with a pane of daylight in each eye, patient as a guide who has led many people down the same path and never needed to turn around. It held that patient look, and I knew it had time for me even if the day did not. The frost around my legs did not rise or fall. It sat close as a dog that had decided I belonged to it. The white threads hanging from the antlers breathed without wind. They leaned toward my sleeve like grass reaching for a fence. I took the compass out because it felt like a rule to do it. The brass was warm in my palm, warmer than it should have been. The lid stuck a second like a lip and then popped. The needle quivered, spun, and settled, not toward north, but downward, straight through the bowl of the hoof print, like water will point toward a drain. The letters under the needle looked wrong, like they had shifted places when I was not watching. The stag turned its head and the sky moved with it. The whole bald seemed to roll until a flat place lay at my feet I had not noticed a blink before. It was a ring of low stones. They were pale under the lichens, smooth in a way wind does not make. Hair was caught between them, laid down neat and old, gray and black, and a few bright threads like little lines of summer. In the center of the ring was a shallow bowl worn into a slab. On that slab lay things people keep close. Coins scared smooth, a wedding band with a nick, a Boy Scout badge, a prayer card gone blank from fingers, 3 teeth that did not look like deer. The blue scrap hung from the lowest tine like a flag at half-mast. It had my brother-in-law's sweat dried into the weave. It had knots I did not tie, and one of those knots had a single hair of mine caught in it already, dark and short, humming in the cold like a little wire. "Leave it there," the voice said, mild, the way you talk when you do not want to spook a fish. It was him if you wanted it to be. It was not if you were honest. Behind the voice was the steady step sound coming from behind me even while the stag did not move. I set the compass in the bowl because I could not hold it anymore. It sat like it was made to fit that exact place. The lid did not stay shut. It opened itself slow and sighed. The needle swung and pointed not down, not north, but at the middle of my chest, as if there was a little north under my ribs only it knew about. I felt the air on my sternum go cold. The blue scrap fluttered without wind, and the white threads tried to reach the needle, curious as cat whiskers. I pulled my knife to cut a bit of the bandana like a keepsake. The stag's head snapped a hair S-width, and the white threads drew tight with a soft twang that made my jaw ache. The knife felt wrong in my hand. The cold from the antlers went through the handle and into my fingers and sat there like a reprimand. "No steel," came his voice, and then another, and then 3 more, little echoes of different men saying the same thing, older and younger, and none of them turned exactly toward me. I put the knife away because my skin knew I should. I took a pinch of my own hair instead, pulled and twisted it into a little cord like you do when you are nervous, and tied it into the blue. The knot made a sound too small to hear. The bandana warmed under my touch. The white threads leaned in, tasting. The knot sank a little and vanished into the weave the way a seed finds dirt. The antlers lifted. Something eased. The stag came close enough that I could see tiny burrs on the velvet, seeds stuck there from some hollow it had brushed. I smelled spruce sap and cold metal, and that clean hospital smell that comes before bad news. It dipped its head until the tips of the tines set down to either side of my skull, not touching, just bracketing the way a man puts hands on the jambs of a door you are about to walk through. For a heartbeat, the world went quiet as a church in snow. I heard breathing, not mine. Not one voice, but many, lined up in me like notes on a line. I looked for my brother-in-law in its eyes and thought I saw him standing on the ridge back in the day, laughing at a stuck truck, waving me over like always. Then he turned just enough that I saw what was behind him. Far down in that little pane of day, it was a line of other people, their clothes wrong for now, their faces steady, all of them holding small things out in their palms. They were not asking, they were giving. The line did not end. Something in the hoof hole clicked again, soft and pleased. The cup deepened as I watched. The black dirt schooled like fish and then settled. A rib showed and then slid under as if it had been ashamed to be seen. The ground under me had a give like a low breath. I had the sick thought that if I lay down it would hold me, so gentle I would not wake. I backed up slow. The antlers rose inch by inch and did not snag my hat. The blue scrap brushed my sleeve and drew a line of cold along my skin as if a child had run a finger there. When I reached the edge of the ring, the head tilted like a nod or a bow or a warning. The ring of stones had a new thing in it. The compass I had left sat where it sat, but the lid was shut now and sealed with a fine line of frost that did not melt when my breath hit it. I made myself turn and walk. The balds were flat and not flat, far and near, and then the spruce was where it should be and the wind remembered its job and the crickets started like someone had tapped a jar. At the car, an hour later or a minute, there was a hoof print in the dust on the hood. It was clean as if it had been pressed into flour. In the middle of that print, small and neat, lay a single white hair and a knot of blue thread that had not been there when I left, tied in the same mean, careful way as up top. I told my sister I had set the compass where he loved it. That was true when I said it. In the morning, it sat on my kitchen table, cold to the touch, with a smear of black dirt on the lid and a tiny crescent scratched in the brass like a little mouth had taken a sip. The needle does not point north anymore. It points through me. When the house goes still, I hear a soft click from the hall like antlers testing the trim, and some nights right before sleep finds me, I smell spruce and cold pennies at the bedroom door, and the blue thread around one tine of the knob tightens just a hair like a hand asking if I will follow. You ever see a porch light burn where there should not be power? I did. It was a little pearl of yellow hung up there on Hanged Man Ridge, steady and patient as if it had been lit the first night the county ran wire and never got the word to quit. You can see that ridge from town if the air is clean. It is a long shoulder of oak and laurel with a dirt road that keeps going after it runs out. Folks say the name is old. Some say they found a robber swung there in 19-something. Some say it was a farmer who did it himself. The oldest say it is the rope the ridge made when the wind got tired of going around. I work for the co-op. I read meters and sometimes cut lines on dead accounts. In late fall, we had a cleanup list, places that had been empty since the mine shut, and the last checks bounced. Every meter on that ridge was supposed to be done. Still, most nights around supper time, a little light burned up there and stayed until the bats got slow. Dispatch said the drop was cut at that address years back. The meter was a ghost. They laughed. I did not. My mother asked me not to go. "Leave that ridge alone," she said, washing a plate like it was older than both of us. "That porch light is not for you." "What is it for then?" I said, and she shook her head and changed the subject to winter wood. I went anyway, because men do foolish things they can fix with pliers. I took the service truck at last light. The road up was narrow, damp and quiet. The old poles leaned with glass hats that had never learned how to break. They caught the last light and made a green like a bottleneck. The wires did not hum. There was no transformer to complain. Still, somewhere in the trees, a low sound kept time with my heart, in 4 and out 4, which I told myself was the wind losing patience. The house sat as if it had been set down from a height and the earth had not figured out how to take it in. 2 rooms, tin roof, sagging porch with an iron chain hanging from a porcelain base over the steps. The light on that chain was no bright bulb. It was an old pear-shaped thing, glass cloudy with years, moth wings sealed behind the glass like pressed flowers. It burned a deep yellow, the kind you see through eyelids when you are a child asleep on a couch with voices in the next room. The rest of the house was dark. The door was shut. The window nearest the light was boarded with slats nailed in a hurry, pocked with little circles of soot where somebody had touched candles there for many years, and the smoke had kissed the wood over and over. On the porch header above the light, the paint was worn to raw board in a U like a rope had polished it. There were 2 rubbed places in the floorboards where feet had been, back and forth until the wood remembered the weight. The meter glass was clouded with spider silk and dust. The name on the tag was Riddle, the way my grandfather spelled it on checks. The aluminum seal was broken and the disc inside ticked. It turned the wrong way. Every time the porch light breathed brighter, the disc eased back a hair. The meter made a little pleased sound, a soft click, the way a baby will click his tongue when milk hits right. I lifted my hand toward the chain and the link brushed my knuckles like it expected to be held. It was warm, not hot. Warm the way a palm is warm. It ticked as it settled, metal on metal, a tiny sound that had patience in it. The air around the bulb smelled like hot dust out of a winter vent and old paper. Under it, if I let it in slow, there was a faint rope smell, hemp, and old sweat and rivers. "Leave that light," a voice said behind me, the way my mother used to when I was near a hot stove. I turned with my own light blind and too bright. There was no one on the step. The dirt yard showed no track but mine. I thumbed my radio to call dispatch and got nothing but a tone that sounded like a flat line on a hospital show. When I set it down, it stuck to the porch rail. The paint there was tacky, like tree sap. When I pulled it away, it made a small wet sound I do not care to hear again. "Meter at site is still registering," I said to nobody a habit. The bulb breathed. It went soft and bright like a chest, brighter on the out, dimmer on the in. The moth wings inside did not move, but their shadows did, fluttering against the glass the way moths flutter against a screen. The chain lifted a hair and fell, lifted and fell, like something around the corner was tugging it with a careful finger, testing the length, the way men do with a rope they mean to throw over a beam. I got the cutters from my bag and set the jaws around the slack that still ran from the pole to the eaves. The rubber handles felt damp, then warm, then slick, as if a hand had held them a long time before me. The blades kissed aluminum and stopped on something that was not wire. It felt like biting a sin. I eased off and the cutters clicked against each other with a sound that made my molars ache. "Leave it," said the same voice, not unkind. Then another voice from the same mouth said, "Cut it, son." It was the same word twice if you only heard the shape of it. It was two different words if you heard the years between. I reached for the pull chain. My finger and thumb met on a link worn smooth by so many little decisions. The link seemed to know my hand. It fit like a ring. I gave it the smallest pull. The light went down and then up, bright enough that I could see two new things. In the window glass there was not my face, but the pale of a circle, like a noose would look if you saw it flat and clean. In the shadow above the light on the porch header, there was the round scuff of boots where they had tapped a rhythm in air. The bulb hummed pleasant and then soft as a breath behind the ear. A voice I knew better than my own said my first name like a question. I did not mean to, but I answered. The porch boards creaked under weight that was not mine. The chain lifted. It slid around my wrist like a bracelet, warm and interested, and every shadow in the glass leaned close, and I saw the circle in the window tighten the way a mouth does when it means to speak, and I looked up. The circle in the window tightened like a mouth about to say my name. The chain around my wrist lifted a hair and settled, warm as a hand trying to decide if it knows you. The bulb breathed. It swelled and dimmed, soft yellow rolling across the porch boards like a small tide. A rope smell rose under the dust and hot paper, hemp and old sweat and creek water that had dried in rope fiber long ago. I tried to pull loose, slow, polite, the way you do with a dog that has your sleeve. The chain slid but did not let go. The porcelain base creaked, not from weight, but from remembering weight. The smooth places worn on the floorboards held my boots like they were two old friends. When I tried to step back, my toes set themselves in those shallow bowls without asking me. "Leave that light," the voice said, quiet and close. It sounded like my mother if she had smoked for 40 years, and like a man who had walked long in wet socks, and like a stranger who knew my first day of school. It had kind in it, and it had the kind that wants what it wants. I said, "I am here on work because men say foolish things to rules made before their fathers were born." The meter disc ticked and turned backward a hair. The little pawl inside made a pleased click like a baby drinking right. The bulb brightened with the click and the chain warmed. My breath found the bulb's pace. In when it dimmed, out when it flared. If I held my breath, my wrist hurt. I reached for the base with my free hand to unscrew the bulb. The glass felt slick, not from dust, but like skin after a bath. The moth wings inside looked soft and dry, but when my fingers touched the glass, their shadows fluttered as if a wind had found them. The bulb spun a quarter turn and stopped against a stiffness that was not thread, the way a jaw stops before a word it does not want to say. "Cut it," another voice said. Same mouth, different year. It was my grandfather, maybe. It was a man in a hat I could not name. "Cut the drop clean." I lifted the cutters again. The jaws fit the slack like a rule fits a wrong. I squeezed. The rubber grips went warm. My teeth itched like I was chewing foil. The blades bit and then stopped against something round that rolled and pressed back, not wire, not wood. I thought I saw the slack shiver like a snake working its shoulders through a hole. The cutters slid off and clacked together, and the clack rang in the boards and came back not as a clack but as a little heel tap in air. "Step off easy," a man said, soft as a friend on a beam. The boots in the floorboards did their old dance by themselves. The wood sighed under me. The painted U above the light seemed to freshen, pale and clean, like rope had just taken it for its own again. In the window, the circle held steady as a schoolroom clock. In the round of it, I did not see my face. I saw a face-shaped pail with no features. It leaned and eased the way breath fogs glass, and behind it the room held the dark shape of a beam. "Not for me," I said, and my voice knew it was a lie. The chain tightened like it had heard that before. It pulled my wrist up and with it my shoulder, slow as a good horse, patient as a hand with time. My radio on the rail gave a little jump and stuck back again to the tacky paint. The little tone in it changed. It was not a flat line. It was a low hum that matched the bulb. I thought of the breaker box. I thought of my mother washing a plate. I thought of every porch I had ever stood under to tell someone bad news, and every porch that had held me in rain when I was a boy. The breath of the bulb deepened. The moth shadows fluttered steady. The circle in the window closed as neat as a mouth making a kiss. I put my teeth to the chain. It tasted like pennies and sweat. I spit, and the spit gleamed on a link like a little eye. I hooked my free hand behind the porch post and leaned back with my weight, not fighting the pull, but making it pull more than it wanted with the same slow, stubborn. Metal shifted above me. The porcelain base clicked. The chain slid a link. It made a small sound like a sigh that had learned manners. My wrist skin lifted with it, then let go wet. I fell against the rail and the radio came free with a wet pop that felt like tearing tape. The bulb dimmed, not to dark, but to the kind of yellow that means a breath has run short. The meter disc jerked forward a hair, then back, as if it did not know which direction a life should spin. The boots worn in the floor eased. The porch boards under them were still warm. "Leave it on," the first voice said kindly. "Someone is late." "I am not him," I said, because fear makes you talk like that matters. "Someone is always late," the voice said, and the chain ticked once, as if to agree. I walked backward off that porch like a man easing away from a dog he is not sure of, slow and hands out. The light breathed at me once, brighter, then settled to a watchful glow. At the truck, my key bit wrong in the ignition like my teeth still had chain in them. The road down was tight and damp. The poles with their glass hats leaned and watched me go. By the highway, when I looked back, the ridge was a long shoulder with a single yellow freckle on it. Steady as a star somebody had brought too close to earth. I did not go to dispatch. I went home. My mother's porch was dark. Switch off, breaker off. It should have been dark. The chain under her eave hung quiet. When I set my hand on the knob, something warm slid around my wrist from the inside, soft as a bracelet that has been there a long time. My porch light, the one by my own door, breathed on as I stepped inside. Though I had shut its breaker last week to save on a bill with no work, it glowed a deep, kind yellow through the shade, brighter when I breathed out, dimmer when I breathed in, patient as a rule. The meter on my house ticks backward now some nights, just a hair. The disc makes a little pleased click that I used to hear on the ridge. Above my porch light, the paint has a fresh pale hue. The floor by the door has two new smooth places where feet could stand even if the body was not there yet. In the window, if I stare too long, a circle tightens and eases, like a mouth that knows my name and is waiting for me to say it back. I heard a bell where no school had stood open in 50 years. It rang clear as glass through the trees, 3 slow notes that should have been swallowed by the laurel. I was up the ridge coon hunting, alone except for the dark and the soft talk of Cartwright Creek below. The sound came from a cut I knew, a place folks call Teacher's Hollow, and my feet turned that way before my head said yes. People in our county talk about the windowless schoolhouse like it is a joke you do not laugh at. They say it was a one-room building tucked back off the old company road, with its whole north wall paneled in black, no windows at all, like it had turned its face to the mountain. They say it was bricked over after a bad winter, and then they shake their heads and change the subject. My Aunt Jo used to say, "Do not go there after sundown because children are hungry in the dark." The trail down was slick with leaf rot. I could smell wet wool and mouse nests. The moon was late, and the air had that hollow sound it gets when frost is close. The bell rang once more, softer, like a hand covering it. I pushed through rhododendron, and there it was, squatting in a bald spot, blacker than it should have been, with the trees leaning back from it like they had tried to get away. The south side had windows boarded shut, gray planks with nail heads like blind eyes. The north side was wrong. It was one smooth skin of old tar paper and boards painted a color that might have once been white. There were 6 pale rectangles along that wall where rain never seemed to touch, as if it were remembering where windows used to be. Under each pale spot, the wood was dented with little half-moons the size of fingernails. The door was off-center and chained with a length of wire. I put my light on it. The wire looked like it had been twisted yesterday. My hand shook anyway, and I do not know if that was the air or my age. When I touched the latch, it lifted itself and the wire fell like somebody had cut it from the inside. The smell that came out was chalk and old milk and a little coal smoke. It was the smell of every classroom I ever sat in, boiled down and poured into a jar. I stepped in on floorboards that gave a whisper under my weight. Dust lay thick as flour, but there were footprints pressed into it. They were small at first, then bigger toward the back. They went to the teacher's desk and stopped. My light caught the slate board. There were arithmetic problems half erased, and a poem my mother used to make us say about the frost on the fence and the late corn. The chalk sat on the sill with a hair caught in it. When I moved my light, the chalk rolled an inch uphill and stopped like a fish testing a current. I said hello without meaning to. My voice went flat and thin and slid away like a button dropped on the floor. The room answered with a little stir, the kind of sound a crowd makes when the preacher says something that lands. I heard a chair leg scrape. I smelled wet wool again, warmed by bodies that were not there. Hands flat, a woman's voice said, soft and worn thin. Eyes forward. I turned toward the north wall. It held the cold the way a creek holds a current. If you looked straight at it, it was just old boards. If you stared long enough, the pale rectangles darkened a shade, and then lighter shadows pressed against them from the inside. They were the size of faces. They pressed and eased like breath against glass that was not there. The desks were small, with inkwells stopped with pennies. One had carved into it lacy 1938 and a heart. Another had nail marks raked into the varnish where little hands had tried to grip. I put my fingers in those grooves without thinking. The wood was warm. I pulled back quick like I had touched a wrist that twitched. On the teacher's desk sat a little bell, a pointer stick, a jar of buttons, and a book wrapped in brown paper. The paper had a smooth spot where a hand had rested for years. There was a roll book open to a page where names filled the left margin, neat as stitches. Nell, Gurn, Lacey, Tom. The last 2 lines were blank. Under the blanks, in pencil faint as breath, was the date. It was today's date. I touched the page. The pencil line darkened under my finger, as if I had traced it. The corner of the page lifted and lay down again. I glanced at the photograph on the back wall. It showed a row of children in wool coats with ears sticking out and faces pulled solemn. A woman stood behind them with a straight mouth and a ribbon at her throat. Down on the end there was a boy with a stubborn cowlick and a scar on his top lip. He looked like me at 8. He looked like my father at 8. He looked like every boy I ever knew in these hills, and the longer I stared, the more sure I was I had seen that cowlick in a mirror. Hands flat, the woman's voice said again. Closer now. Gentle, like if you did not mind, please. The chalk lifted and wrote slow on the slate. It wrote my first name in a careful hand, then my last. It did not hesitate, like it had been practicing while I walked. Present, I said, and I do not know why I said it. The word came out like a cough. Eyes forward, she said, and the breath against that north wall gathered and leaned as if the whole dark outside had come to look in through windows that were not there. And I felt something set down in the empty seat behind me, and the bell on the desk trembled against the wood like a heartbeat learning a new beat. Something sat down behind me and settled like a sack of beans, and the weight of it creaked the board under the seat. The bell on the desk trembled again and stopped, as if a finger had pressed it still. The air was chalk and wool and cold iron. I put my hands flat on the desk because I did not know what else to do. The wood was warm where little hands had been. Under the warmth was a slow cold, the kind that lives in cellars. Good, the woman's voice said. Hands flat, eyes forward. The slate filled on its own. The chalk moved neat and careful, like the hand that held it had done this long enough to wear the muscles smooth. It wrote sums I remembered. Then the title of that frost poem. Then my name again, this time with a little check beside it. The roll book on the desk turned a page without a hand, and the pencil lay down a slow dark line where a blank had been. My name was there. Under it, the tip tapped twice and began a second name, just the first letter, slow as if the pencil had to think. The breath against the north wall deepened. The pale rectangles darkened to shade. If I looked too long, the darker shapes pressing there built their own faces. I saw a cheek, the bridge of a nose, the curve of lips held tight. They eased and leaned, eased and leaned. It felt like my own breath had to match theirs, or I would fall out of step with the room and be left behind. A whisper ran through the desks. It was not words at first. It was the sound of cloth moving over wood, of small boots setting down gentle to keep from getting caught. Then I heard names, soft and eager. Nell, Gurn, Lacey, Tom. They said them like they had not heard anyone say them in a long time and wanted to try them on their tongues again. A girl's voice near my ear said, "I am cold. It is like a root cellar." "Eyes forward," the woman said. "We do not turn to the wall. We do not feed it with our faces." I did not want to ask, but my mouth asked. "What is at the wall?" "The outside," she said, and her voice had a smile that was not kind. "The outside is hungry." The pointer on the desk slid and rapped my knuckles, gentle, a warning. Pain ran up my finger bones and left a taste like chalk. I stared at the board. The chalk wrote the next line of the poem, and I said it without meaning to, the way a song will find its own words. The little weight behind me leaned closer. The heat of it washed my shoulders damp like a coat that had once been wet. I tried to stand. The desk tugged my thighs. The invisible class breathed in as one. The bell lifted and tilted toward me, as if asking to be rung, then lay flat again without a sound. The door in my side vision seemed farther away than it should have been. The wire that had fallen was back, not on the latch this time, but laid in a loop across the floor like a teacher lays a ribbon out for a lesson. "Present," the woman said, the way you say grace. "Present. Present," the class breathed. I put one hand back slow behind my hip like I might touch a shoulder. My fingers met wool that did not make sense. It was a sweater that would have been new in a year with a 9 in it. Under the wool was a small shoulder blade. It flexed. The body did not turn. The head did not turn. Eyes forward. The sweater smelled like coal smoke and milk. My hand shook so bad I clawed air. The rollbook rustled again. The pencil made another letter in that second line. It looked like the start of my father's name, the way Aunt Jo had written it in a cookbook once, neat and square. The hair stood up along my neck. I said his name without the idea in it, just the shape of it in my mouth. The weight behind me shifted. The breath on the north wall came deeper as if it had caught a scent. "Eyes forward," the woman said, and her voice reached right through me. I grabbed the bell. It was warmer than the room. It jumped in my hand, a live thing, and clapped against my finger bone so it rang once high and thin. The faces in the wall pressed hard so the pale went dark, so I could see just for a blink a boy with a stubborn cowlick and a scar on his lip push both hands where a window would have been. He was not the boy in the picture. He was that boy 30 seconds after the picture. He was my father at 8. He did not make a sound. He fogged the wood with a breath that did not show, and his fingers left half moons under the pail like all the others. The desks behind me pushed back as if knees had scraped out. The room stood. It did not scrape like a crowd. It rose like one person. The pointer tapped my hand once more and the jar of buttons rolled. They spilled toward the north wall and stopped in a perfect line under the pale spots, each one the size of an eye. "Dismissed," the woman said, and then, in a softer voice near my ear, meant for me only, "Not you." Something small and cool took my wrist. It set my hand flat again. It held me like a mother holds a child's arm to keep them from stepping into the road. I could have stayed. That is the part I do not like to admit. The room was terrible, but it knew me. It said my name right. It smelled like the first day of school. like wet wool and chalk, and the idea that if you just sit and do it right, you will be safe. I slid my hand sideways. I recited the end of the poem too fast. I said the last line like a plug pulled. The bell in my fist gave one small, harmless ring. The door was where it was supposed to be again. The wire lay like a snake that had shed its skin. I ran. I did not look at the wall. It took all I had not to. The cold chased me to the tree line and then stopped, polite as a school rule. I went home with chalk in the creases of my knuckles. It does not wash clean. Nights, right when the bell would have rung in that room, I feel my hands go flat on my own kitchen table. I do not remember putting them there. The north wall of my house is colder than the others. 6 pale spots stay clean when the rest goes gray. If I stare too long, I see darker shapes press and ease. The roll book sits where I did not put it, open on the counter. My name is there. Under it, the pencil is writing the second name, slow and careful, letter by letter. It is not my father's name. It is a name I do not know yet, and the point moves by itself a little every night, as if the child who owns it is walking to school in the dark. I first heard it on a still night when even the creek held its tongue. It was breathing, not wind, not a bear. Breathing from inside rock. Long draw in, long let out, steady as a sleeping chest. I was standing below the old drift above Baxter Hollow, a hole everyone said was sealed since the year my father died down there. Frost smoked from my mouth, and that breath from the mountain came warm against my face, thick and sweet with coal dust and something like oil and old lunch meat. I told myself it was a trick of air, a temperature thing. That is what folks say when the hills do something they do not like. The timber prop at the opening was sunk and rotten, but there was a gap at the bottom where water had eaten a notch. When the mountain inhaled, leaves slid toward that notch like they wanted in. When it exhaled, the leaves lifted and hung a second, the way a curtain does when a bus rushes by. I crouched and put my ear to the crack. The breath stroked my cheek. It carried a voice so faint I thought it was blood in my own ear. That voice said my name the way my father used to when he came off shift and wanted me to come see his boots. I went home sick to my stomach and tried to forget it. I lasted 2 nights. On the third, I took a light, a coil of rope, and the little key that used to open my father's locker. The key had a notch worn smooth where he had rubbed it without thinking. I kept it because it felt like a handle to a door that was gone. The drift mouth tasted black. The rotten prop gave easy to my boot, and I pulled 3 broken boards aside. Cold air came out like a sigh. Then the breath found me again, warm now with the coal stink that coats your tongue and stays. My light caught the old Bradis cloth hanging in shreds. It lifted and sank like a curtain over a lung. I slid in on my side and the world changed. Sound went close and flat. Dust sparkled in the beam like stars trapped in syrup. The roof was low but not crushed. Old props leaned like broom handles under a wet quilt. My father used to say you can tell rock that is about to go by how it talks. This rock murmured, a slow seed sound, nothing sharp. The floor was slick with a glaze of black mud that had been walked long ago until it held the shape of boots. Some prints were small. Some were big with a worn place under the heel where a man had favored one side. Every 30 paces the breath lifted the dust and laid it back down. It made my own chest answer it without asking. In on 4, out on 4. If I tried to breathe wrong, my ribs ached. At a bend, something small rolled across my light and stopped by my knee. It was a knob from a lunch pail, smooth from fingers. Next to it was a button with a nick that looked like a bite. I did not pick them up. I tucked my rope around a prop and tied it to my belt the way my father taught me when I was a kid playing at mines on the creek bank. The deeper I went, the warmer it got. The smell of oil burned my eyes a little. Past another bend, I found a canary cage on its side. The door was open. There was no bird, just a few yellow feathers turned gray. The breath made the feathers lift and lay down, gentle as a hand. "Bad air," I said aloud to hear my voice. It went short and dull, like chalk tapping a board. Past the cage, the drift narrowed to a seam scraped close, coal on both sides so shiny it took my light and threw it back. The roof dipped until I had to crab on my knees. The breath came stronger here. In. Out. It pulled little streams through cracks and made them sing. It warmed the sweat on my face and set it cold again. My teeth buzzed. At the very back, the seam turned from shiny to smooth. It looked burnished, like something inside had pushed and rubbed a long time. A crack ran along it, a mouth line just wide enough to slide fingertips in. The breath came from there. It licked my knuckles the way a stove does when you open the door and the heat rolls out. It smelled like coal and pennies and the soap my mother used to scrub my father's neck when he fell asleep at the table after shift. "Son," the breath said. It did not come from my head this time. It came up through the crack and touched my mouth on its way by. It was his voice the day he taught me to spit on my gloves in winter so they would stick to the hammer. I put my ear to the seam. The rock was warm as a person. Behind it, something big moved slow, heavy as water in a tank. On the floor under the crack lay a little stack of paper. They were punch cards from the clock, gone soft with damp, stuck together. Somebody had laid them there in a neat pile. On the top one was a name in pencil. It was not my father's. It was mine, written in a hand that leaned left like his did when he was tired. The breath changed. It gathered. The crack drew in. I felt the seam take air like a body about to try a new pain. I slid my fingers into the warm line without thinking, like you do when somebody holds out a hand. The coal closed around my fingers like lips. Then, with a sound like a deep bed sitting down, the seam inhaled hard. My arm went into the wrist. The rope at my belt tightened. My shoulder bumped the smooth rock. The coal was not hard in there. It was hot and careful. It pulled like a nurse pulling you through a door. I had the stupid thought that if I exhaled when it inhaled, we would fit, and the idea made me lightheaded with fear and something worse. I tried to yank my hand back, and the seam held my fingers like a mother holds a child who wants to step into the road. The breath paused, full, waiting for me to do it right. The breath paused, full, waiting for me to do it right. I matched it the way my father taught me to match a sledge to a swing. I let my own air out slow, long as I could. The seam drew me to the elbow with a warm pull that was careful as a nurse. The coal around my fingers flexed. It was not rock in there. It was something with give and patience. It held my hand the way a mouth holds a spoon. "Good," my father's voice said, close his lips at my ear. "Ride it." The rope at my belt tightened and then went slack, as if it could not decide which side of the world I belonged to. I dug my knees in the black mud and felt old boot prints under me, worn shallow by men who had waited and done as they were told. The breath drew in again. I had to exhale to fit it. When I tried to hold back, the seam pinched my knuckles so my eyes watered and my teeth clicked together with a taste like a nail. "Son," he said, "easy. We do not fight air. We ride it." Behind the crack, something shifted slow, like a big sack being turned in a bed. I heard a tin lunch pail roll and bump and stop. I smelled oil and old lunch meat, the kind that goes shiny around the edges in a hot mine. There was the faintest scrape of a shovel laying itself down. I thought of the night he did not come home and the way the tipple lights made a sunrise where there should not be one. I had the little locker key in my pocket. I slid it between my pinned fingers. The seam tasted the metal. The warm pressure found the notch he had worn with his thumb and held there like a tongue against a loose tooth. I twisted. Something clicked under the coal. The breath shivered and lost its count for a beat. The seam exhaled hard and pushed into my mouth a warm thickness that was not air. I gagged on it. It tasted like coal and pennies and the soap my mother used to scrub the grit out of my father's hairline while he snored in a chair. The exhale left things on the floor by my knees. A cap lamp glass like a tear. A bent spoon. A prayer card soft as cloth. The picture rubbed away by a thumb that had wanted the face of a saint to live. My light shook over them. The spoon's bowl had teeth marks. "We are thin down here," his voice said. It came from the seam and from the old props and from right behind my ribs. "Breath runs out. You bring it. That is the job." I understood then. The crack was a mouth and a lung, and I was to be a straw. They wanted me to lend them air the way a man borrows matches. My breath would become a road between me and the seam. Shift would not end as long as I could breathe. I panicked and did what a child does. I pulled wrong. The seam tightened. Pain lit up my fingers like sparks. My shoulder thumped the wall. The rope bit my waist. The breath held full and waited for me to remember the count. In on 4. Out on 4. It had the patience of a foreman who knows you will learn because there is no other choice. "Turn the key," he said, and his voice had tired in it, the kind he had used when I would not quit dragging my feet on the porch. I twisted the locker key further. It did not turn like a lock, it turned like a rib. The seam softened around my wrist in a way that made me think of a body giving birth. The crack widened a hair and then narrowed, not taking me, just wrapping me closer. The breath deepened to a slow animal sound. The roof talked in a small dust whisper. A prop ticked. I could have stayed. I had the crazy thought that if I let the count carry me, they would learn me and my father would talk into my mouth when I slept and I would never again breathe alone. He said my name the way he used to when he was proud of a straight cut. The seam kissed my knuckles. I spat into my glove. He had taught me that on a winter hammer. Spit sticks. I breathed out hard when the seam drew in, and I twisted my wrist with the spit slick between skin and coal. It slid a little. The coal tasted my spit and shivered. I did it again, matched it wrong on purpose, and pain came bright and cold. But my hand moved. The rope tugged in time with my stupid heart. I braced my boots against the old boot prints like I was putting my feet in someone else's shoes, and I yanked. The seam said my name like a hurt. It bit down. Bones ground. Something in my ring finger popped like a knuckle that will not go back. I screamed and the sound went nowhere, just into the coal and back into my mouth. Then the seam let me go the way a tired hand lets a tool drop. I fell on my back in black mud with my arm slicked to the elbow, and the exhale that came out of the crack lifted the dust and set it down gentle as if it was a blanket on a child. I crawled. The breath followed, soft, counting. In on 4, out on 4. I backed around the bend, rope scraping props, light bouncing. The canary feathers lifted as I passed and lay down like a sigh. At the mouth, the cold hit my face so hard my eyes shocked and watered. The night air felt thin and wrong and too light to carry a grown man. Behind me, the seam took one deep breath in. The brattice cloth pulled tight and held, the way a chest holds at the top when a sob is coming. Then it let out, long and slow, and the leaves at the drift rolled forward and back, like they were thinking about coming after me. The voice that was my father's said, plain as a prayer, "Shift is not over." I went home with black to the elbow and a ring of bruises around my wrist that looked like something had counted my bones. I washed until the water ran clear, and it never ran clear. Nights, right when the tipple would have lit if we still had a tipple, my chest starts to move on its own. In on 4, out on 4. If I try to stop, I hear props tick in my walls, and dust lifts off the dresser and lays back down neat as a quilt. In the morning, there is coal grit on the pillow. Sometimes a bent spoon or a button sits on the floor by my bed, warm like somebody just set it there. There are punch cards on my kitchen table now. They were not there yesterday. The top one has my name in a hand that leans left like his. Under mine, a second line is starting, slow, careful, as if the pencil needs to think. When the house is quiet, I hear the clock I do not own stamp the hour, and my lungs answer. I have not been back to the seam, but I do not think that matters. Some nights the walls breathe. Some nights my mouth tastes like oil and old lunch meat. Some nights, just before I sleep, I feel a warm hand at my elbow and my father saying, almost kind, almost proud, "Ride it." And I do. I do because I cannot help it, and the count keeps going, and I cannot tell which side of the world is borrowing who. I was 27 when I learned you can stand beside an oven that never held a fire and still feel warm as if you are next to a sleeping animal. Folks up Dog Hobble Cove call it the unfired kiln. They say the old preacher built it to make revival jugs and never set a flame in it. But the clay inside went hard anyway. Not by heat, but by names. Delia asked me to go up there with her. She is my neighbor, and she was clearing her family's place, pulling tin and selling what brick she could. She said there was a kiln built into the bank behind her great-aunt's shed, half in the earth, half out, with a stone arch like a smile that did not reach the eyes. She wanted to salvage the fire brick. She promised me a stack if I helped. I said yes because I did not believe the stories and I wanted brick for a little oven of my own. We went late, because that is when she could get off. Evening had that blue look down low and gold up top. The shed roof had settled. The boards wore the smell of mice and out-of-date feed. Behind it the hill rose and the kiln was tucked into the slope like a burrow. The arch was fieldstone with 2 iron doors set side by side for the firebox, and above them the big mouth of the chamber sealed with clay and old brick. The flue ran up a short stack that had tipped a little, like a finger pointing at the wrong thing. It was cool, but standing near that arch I felt a soft heat. It was not summer heat. It was the heat of a hand held a while. The air from the peephole brushed my wrist, slow in, slow out. I put my ear to the arch and heard tiny ticks like a cooling oven makes, only there was no fire to cool from. The smell was wet clay and vinegar and iron, and something sweet under it like a jar of fruit that has gone too long. Delia said, "My great-granddaddy helped lay this. Preacher pots had men hauling red clay from the branch and salt from the store. Folks brought hair and a piece of cloth from their people and pressed it to the jars. He was going to glaze them with brine and make them shine like rain. Then that winter went bad. They sealed the kiln and never lit it. They say if you fire it now, it will set what you do not want set." I looked at the arch. The door to the big chamber was not brick all the way. Someone had left a peephole, a little circle the size of a biscuit can lid, plugged with a rag that had gone black. The rag moved gentle with the breath. I pulled it. The rag came easy and left a dark, wet circle on my palm that smelled like river mud. Cool air stroked my face. The inside of the kiln was not black. It was gray and slick like the inside of a mouth. "Do not," Delia said, but she said it quiet, like church. "We will pry the arch tomorrow in daylight." I held the lantern up and peered through. Shelves ran along the sides, old kiln shelves and posts, all glossy with damp. On those shelves sat jars and jugs and bowls that should have slumped away years ago if they were never fired. They were not hard. Their rims were leather soft. Finger ridges showed where someone had stroked them and left the prints there on purpose. A few had sprigs with little faces pressed on, clumsy and sweet, the way a child will press a coin to make a picture. The light made the damp shine. A drop hung on a rim and trembled and did not fall. I set my thumb on the edge of the hole, and the clay under the arch gave like skin. Heat came up like breath from a chest. The damper rod stuck in the flue grated and moved a hair on its own, as if someone under the arch had nudged it with a stick to make the draw right. A jug sat closest, right under the hole. A name was scratched into the belly. It was my last name. Not mine, maybe, but ours. The date under it was old, but the month and day were my sister's wedding day. I laughed because fear makes you laugh at the worst time. The sound of it went short and dull into the hole and came back a second later smeared, as if the kiln had chewed it and tried to say it back to me. Delia said, "Folks brought their names here. He told them names were Clay, and Clay remembers." "Maybe he was right," I said, and I did not mean to sound like I believed it. I struck a match and held it to the peep. The flame leaned hard into the dark, long and blue at the tip. The kiln took it without smoke. It made a soft throat sound. The shelves inside seemed to tilt a little, like a floor when a crowded room shifts. The match burned my fingers and went out. For a breath, the chamber stayed lit without a light, as if something remembered how to glow. In that little glow, I saw the damp skin of a jar lift in print with a hand. There was no hand. The print raised like a memory and then settled. "Do you feel that?" Delia asked. Her voice had gone small. "I can feel it in my teeth." The breath from the peep pulled at my mouth like a little tide. I exhaled without choosing to, and my breath slid in and did not come back. The air coming out smelled sweet and wrong. It tasted like slip on my tongue, like I had licked a bowl. The lantern flame guttered and came back. The damper rod eased another inch. Somewhere inside, deeper than my light, there was a soft, slow tap, tap, tap. It was a finger against a jar, testing the sound of a body that is not set yet. It went around the shelves, patient, the way a potter checks work in a long line, one by one, listening for the note. "Stop," Delia said, but she did not touch me. She was holding her own arms like a cold person. "I do not want to hear it say mine." I put my hand on the stone to steady myself. The arch was slick with a sweat that smelled like the creek in July. I slid 2 fingers through the peep to feel the inside air. It was warmer in there. It had a pulse. Clay kissed my knuckles and held. The breath drew long. The whole chamber seemed to sigh. The iron doors below creaked without moving. From the dark came a voice I knew, ground small and soft by time. My mother's voice when she taught me to blow on a spoon. She said my name and then, kind and sure as a rule, "Now breathe in for me." I did as she taught me. I breathed in. The kiln took that breath like a baby takes milk, slow and greedy and sure. Warmth ran along my teeth. Slip taste filled my mouth, sour and sweet like vinegar and cream. Clay kissed my knuckles and climbed a finger joint, soft pressure that knew me. The damper rod in the flue eased another inch and the whole arch gave a small contented tick, the sound a stove makes when it is settling to work. "Good," my mother's voice said, low and near, like she had leaned across a bowl to show me. "Now again." I pulled my hand, but the kiss held. My fingers were not stuck by force. They were held by want. The shelves inside breathed with me. I could see it in the shine. The damp on their edges swelled and slackened, a little tide. The tapping went around the chamber, tap, 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 then a pause to listen, then tap again. When it touched the jug that had our last name scratched on, the note changed from dull to higher like a throat clearing. Delia whispered, "It is learning your breath." She stood with her hands clasped up under her chin. "Please stop. Please." I tried to breathe wrong, to choke the count, but the arch hummed against my cheek and my ribs found the right pace without me. In on 4, out on 4. The little draft from the peep pulled the hairs on my lip. The jug under the hole bulged a hair, then smoothed, the way a lung does when you calm down. I saw the word under our last name grow a letter. It was my first. The clay did not scratch from outside. It lifted from within, the way a worm raises a ridge under dirt. I stuck my tongue out like a kid in a Dr. OS office and spit on my fingers. Spit makes things slip. My father had taught me that on other hard days. The wet went cool on my skin, then warm as the kiln tasted it. The hold loosened a hair. I twisted. The dry grit of sand in the clay rasped my nail. I got the tip of my index loose with a sweet little pop like a jar seal. The kiln made a small disappointed sound, almost a sigh. "Now blow," my mother's voice said, soft but with the old rule in it. I wanted to please her. That is the part I do not like saying out loud. I had not heard that tone in years. It slid past fear and went right to habit. I bent and blew through the peep as if across a spoon. Warmth poured up my face and set camp in my sinuses. The jug with our name trembled. The tapping finger came to it and tapped once, twice. The note went brighter. It almost rang. Delia moved. She dragged the damper rod down hard. Iron squealed and threw scale. The draw faltered. The breath out of the peep went wobbly like a person who has been interrupted mid-word. She grabbed my wrist where it disappeared and pulled. The arch flexed under my cheek. The clay inside held my middle fingers, not tight, but stubborn, like a baby holding your thumb and not wanting to let it go yet. "Give me the rag," she said. I shoved the black rag at her with my free hand. She balled it and pushed it for the hole. The rag did not go in. The hole took a taste and pushed it back, soaked and shining, as if to say not that. The rag left a print on her palm where she had pressed. Little ridges raised along the meat of her hand. Wet clay lines that matched her own lines. They stayed when she lifted it. She looked at them and swallowed hard. "Do not let it write me," she said, breath shaking. I do not want to be set. I made myself breathe wrong. I jerked the count like a misstep on a porch. Pain flashed up my middle fingers, bright as a match. The clay tightened and then, fast as temper, let go. I fell back on my tail and dragged a rope of warm slip with me like a snail trail. The damp ran off my knuckles and left gray fingerprints on the stone. I wiped and they would not come clean. The skin on my finger pads looked pale and smooth, like I had worked a belt sander. When I pressed them together, tiny crackles ran like dry glaze crazing. Inside the kiln, the tapper went on. It did not care about us. Tap. Listen. Tap. A small, breathy laugh came from the shelves. My mother's laugh from a kitchen years ago. And then others braided in. Men and women and a child, each saying a name soft with pride. The way people do when they lift a jar and show it off before it has ever seen flame. A draft ran along the floor and chilled my ankles. Under the arch, some thin sheen crept out over the threshold, clear and slick as egg white. It reached for my boot, testing the leather for a story. "We are done," Delia said, and her voice was the old mountain voice that ends a thing. She hooked her arm under mine and hauled. We backed across leaves and mouse-chewed twine, through the smell of iron and vinegar and river mud. Behind us, the kiln breathed like a sleeper. The damper rod lifted itself a thoughtful inch, then another. The rag we had pulled lay by the hole and moved with the breath, in then out, as if there were lips there practicing a kiss. We left it. We truly left it. The dark had laid down thick by the time we reached the road. At the truck, my fingers would not turn the key right. The pads were too smooth. I could not get a grip. Delia had to do it. She did not look at her palm. She kept it tucked against her shirt like you do when you carry a baby's head. At home, long past midnight, I set my hands under the tap and scrubbed. Clay came away in thin peels. My prints did not come back. My phone would not recognize me. I pressed my thumb on the glass again and again until it felt like I was whispering to a dead thing that would not answer. In the morning, there was a jug on my kitchen table that I do not own. It was soft, not hard, and cool the way a sleeping mouth is cool. Our last name was raised on its belly as if a worm had been through. Under it, today's date had climbed out of the clay and laid itself there neat. When I leaned close, it smelled like the inside of the kiln and my mother's apron and the creek behind the house in July. Inside the jug, a wet print showed where hands had shaped it. The ridges in those prints matched mine, line for line, though mine are gone from my fingers. Every time I breathe near it, the jug warms a hair and sweats a clear bead at the lip. If I say a name out loud, any name at all I hear, very faint, a tap from inside, like someone testing the wall that will one day hold them steady. I have stopped saying names in the house. I try not to say my own when I answer the phone. When the heat kicks on, the flue damper ticks by itself. A small iron, yes, a small iron no, as the breath in the room counts. Delia texts that she went back to pull brick and the arch would not give. She says the mouth looks the same but feels different, like a smile that means something else. She sent a picture of her palm. The clay ridges there have dried. They have cracked like glaze. In the cracks, I can see little letters trying to stand up. If I stare, they almost spell her name. Tonight, the jug on my table is warmer than the room. It fogs a circle on the window when I set it near the glass. When I sleep, I feel breath at my ear, patient and kind and old as a rule. It says hush and then, sweet as wood smoke, now breathe in for me. I do not know what happens if I refuse. I do not know what happens if I do. The tapping goes around the shelves I cannot see, listening for the note that means a name has set. It keeps time with my heart. And when I wake, there is a new letter lifting itself on the jug's belly from the inside, careful and sure, partway through a name I do not know yet. I found the red thread by accident, and I wish I had left it where it lay. It was late June, damp as bathwater, the kind of evening where the gnats float like ash in front of your face and the creek keeps talking to itself down in the dark. My sister's boy had lost his young hound, Cricket, up in the laurel above Millstone Branch. I said I would go up and whistle him out before the coyotes got brave. The laurel up there is mean. It grows shoulder to shoulder, hard leaves clicking together like teeth when the breeze moves. My granny used to call those thickets laurel hell for a reason. You can be 10 steps from the road and feel like you rode a bus to get back. I cut through the first belt where the old logging road goes soft and vanishes. Cricket's bell was faint somewhere deeper, that little tin sound that means he is moving but not sure where. I kept talking so the bears would know I was a person. I had a little pocket knife, a light, a bottle of water, and a bad feeling that got worse the higher I climbed. The thread caught me at the knee. It was just there, a fine red line across the path like somebody had strung a child-esque kite string from bush to bush. If the light had been any darker, I would not have seen it. It was bright as blood, so clean it looked painted, so thin it made my eyes fight to focus. When I reached down and touched it, it felt warm. Not like it had been in the sun, warm like skin. I do not know why I did not cut it then. Maybe I was thinking about that bell. Maybe I was thinking about Granny May telling us not to follow red strings in the laurel, and I wanted to prove her old stories were just stories. That is how you get bit in these hills. Not by snakes, but by pride. I lifted the thread and slid my leg under. It hummed a little when I let it go, a tiny sound you feel more than hear. It ran from a laurel trunk on my left to a slick of rock on my right, tied with neat, tight knots I had not seen before. Little bow knots that were not bows. Little twists that looked like eyes closed in prayer. Every few inches something was tied into it. A button, a lock of hair curled into itself and held with a knot, a baby tooth the size of a grain of corn. I told myself those were rabbit teeth. I told myself a lot of things. Cricket's bell sounded again, deeper. I stepped over and under as the thread switched heights, sometimes at shin, sometimes at waist, sometimes up near my shoulder where it would have taken a tall man to tie. It ran on into the green, around trunks, through forks, across open spots, always clean, never snagged, never frayed. When the wind breathed, the leaves leaned toward it like the whole thicket was listening. The smell up there changed. Laurel is sharp and green. This was sweet underneath, like strawberries going soft on the counter, sweet enough to make your tongue hurt. The deeper I went, the more the thread multiplied. One line became two. Two crossed into a braid. The braid went to a web that was not a spider's. It was a lace, red and neat, woven between the laurel so it made a little tunnel I had to duck to go through. My light caught the thread and threw red back in my eyes, so it was like I was crawling into a mouth. I tried to laugh at myself and could not get sound out. I pulled my knife to cut a slack strand and the blade slid off like it was slicked with oil. The thread did not move. I pinched it between my fingers to test it, and it cut me so fine I did not feel it at first. Blood butted up quick and bright. I watched a drop lean, then touch the thread, and then I watched that drop run along the line away from me, uphill like a tear going back into the eye. I stood there, hand up, and watched my blood disappear into the laurel. The thread twitched once like something far away had tugged it. Cricket's bell jangled hard and stopped. "Cricket," I called. The thicket ate my voice the way a body takes a swallow. I moved faster then. I followed the line at a half-crouch, heart beating up in my throat. Knife back in my pocket because it felt small and foolish. The thread led me through a tight squeeze, past a deadfall where the wood had rotted into fur that came apart under my palm, past a slick rock where someone had pressed handprints into lichen long ago. My light shook. The web opened into a room of laurel, a little hollow with a dirt floor and old roots like ribs along the walls. The thread was everywhere in there. It ran to pegs driven into the ground, it ran to forks of bushes, it ran to a dead trunk where a dozen things hung like wind chimes. They were nothing and they were everything. Bits of ribbon, bottle caps, a baby sock stiff with age, a church key, 2 more little teeth, a drooping ribbon of hair the color of river mud. In the middle of it all was a small spool stuck on a broken twig. It was not wood. It was something pale and smooth, carved with little scratches that looked like tally marks. The thread coming off that spool went straight to a loop on the far side. A loop set at the height of my shoulder. A loop waiting like a hand waiting to shake. "Don't tighten it yet," a woman's voice said behind me. Soft and firm like a mother fixing a tie. I turned so fast I fell. There was nobody there. The leaves moved slow, the way leaves do when something big has just passed through. The loop on the far side lifted a touch and settled, like it had breathed. I should have run then. I stepped toward the loop like I was being polite to it. It smelled sweet and old. It was the smell of the inside of Granny's sewing basket, cedar and lilac and a hint of iron. The loop hung there open, big enough to fit my hand. It fit easy. The thread laid against my wrist without weight. It was soft. It was warm. It cinched just a hair, a little hug, the way a cat curls its tail around you when it walks by. Something moved deep in the laurel and the whole web leaned. The loop tightened. My light flickered across the line and I saw the knots close to my face. They spelled my name the way Granny used to stitch it inside my coats. "Don't tighten it yet," the voice said again. But it was my voice this time, coming from the thread. It said my words in my voice, and the loop around my wrist gave a little kiss of pressure. The kind you would not notice if you were not already scared. I tried to pull my hand back out. The thread slid with me a finger's width, then held. It was warm. It had a pulse. It beat against my skin like a second heart. I looked at the knots close to my thumb. They were neat and small, little sleeping eyes tied shut. As I watched, 2 of them flipped and crossed and made the letter that starts my name. The smell of cedar and lilac rose around me like old blankets. The spool on that twig turned a half click, like a tooth counting. Cricket's bell chimed once. It sounded wrong, muffled and patient, like a thing under a coat. I swung the light. He was there to my right, half behind a curtain of laurel, not far at all. His eyes were wide and wet. He was not bleeding. He was bound. The red line ran across his muzzle and under his jaw in a neat seam so tidy it made my stomach drop. Someone had been careful. Someone loved what they were doing. I reached for him with my free hand. The thread on his face hummed and tightened. The web leaned our way like the whole thicket was taking a step. My loop hugged down against my wrist in answer. When I brushed a single strand over his collar, the strand spoke in my ear in my own voice again. "Don't tighten it yet." I thought of Granny May. I saw her at the kitchen table with her sewing basket open telling us how to pull a knot out. "You do not yank a snarl," she said. "You feed it something, you breathe on it, you talk nice to it. You give it hair, not steel. Steel makes a knot bite." I grabbed a handful of my own hair and twisted a few strands into a little rope. I fed that into the loop. The loop tasted it. That is the only way I can say it. The line shivered soft in my palm. The spool clicked and turned a quarter. The knots near my thumb loosened a hair. I could feel my blood run freer under there for just a breath. The loop wanted more. It wanted more of me. The web all around trembled like grass with a snake moving through. The smell got sweet enough to make my teeth ache. When it touched the thread, it rang once without moving. A tiny sound that slid away up the line and vanished like the blood drop had. The loop went slack enough that my skin slipped, and I jerked my hand out on pure fear. The thread took something with it when it let go. It lifted a thin strip from around my wrist like you peel tape. It did not tear blood. It did not leave raw meat. It left a perfect red mark under the skin. A fine cord laid there, a stitch in a seam. I grabbed Cricket by the scruff and pulled. The web on his muzzle held a second, then ran like water and let him go so fast he fell. He did not bark. He made a sound I did not like to hear from any living thing. It was a soft, thankful moan, the kind a child makes when the fever tips down. The whole room of laurel leaned toward us then, kind as a hug, cruel as a trap. The thread that had been a tunnel began to cross itself in front of me, making a lattice, making letters, making the word come with the loops of our own names stitched into it, mine and his. The spool clicked again and again, eating up slack, fat with what it had got. The twig it sat on had a shine now, pale and polished like bone handled by many hands. I went backward the way I came, not standing, not thinking, just going. The thread followed at knee, then at shin, then at ankle. It reached for the mark under my skin like a magnet reaches a nail. It did not snag on Laurel, it did not jiggle. It came straight. I bent the bell in my fist until it was more sound than thing, and I threw it back into the web. The whole lace shuddered with that small noise, and for one heartbeat the lines near my feet lifted, as if to listen. That was enough. I pushed through a squeeze that scraped my shoulders and rolled over the furred log, and I was in the thin trees again, where the air moved for itself. I did not stand up until I saw the gray of the old road. When I turned, the laurel room looked like any other snarl of green. The red was gone to my eyes. It was there if I did not look straight at it. It was there if I listened. It hummed little, like a mother shushing a child. I got Cricket home. He drank water and would not eat. He lay on the porch with his chin on my boot and flinched every time the wind made the leaves rub. My wrist throbbed under that neat red line. When I touched it with my finger, I felt knots under the skin like beads. If I pressed one, a loop on the far side of my hand lifted, as if I were working a little hidden puppet. I washed with soap that smelled like lilac, and it made me gag. I slept in a chair with the porch light on. I dreamed of the hollow in the laurel, and I dreamed of Granny May laughing without sound. And every time I opened my eyes, there was a line of red across the hallway, right where the light met the dark, and it was always gone when I blinked. 2 days later, I found a spool on my kitchen counter. It was pale and smooth, carved around with little hash marks. It did not roll. It sat heavy as a tooth. A single red thread came off it and ran along the baseboard neat as trim, and slipped under the door toward the porch. When I leaned close, it smelled like cedar and lilac and a bit like iron. The knots tied into it spelled my name, and after that, spelled Cricket, and after that, started on a third name I did not know yet, letter by letter, neat and sure. I have not touched it. I hear my voice in it sometimes, patient, right there in the wall, telling me in a whisper that could be a promise or a warning. Don't tighten it yet. If you grow up in the mountains, you learn what to ignore. You ignore lights in the trees that move like lanterns but aren't. You ignore footsteps that match yours on the old logging roads. And you especially ignore a whistle after dark. Everyone says that. I used to laugh at it. Cheap superstition, I thought. Then that hollow whistled back at me. It started on a late fall evening when the light goes thin, and the air smells like wet leaves and iron. I was surveying an abandoned tract for a trail group, just a simple day of marking blowdowns and water bars. The place sat 5 miles off the blacktop, past a rusted gate, past a little cemetery with sandstone markers, past the last place anyone would bother to shout if you went missing. They called it Blackbird Hollow. My granddad used to spit when he said that name, like the word itself tasted bad. At the bait shop outside town, an old woman with milk-white eyes heard where I was headed and didn't even look up from her crossword. She just said, "Don't you whistle?" I told her I wouldn't. I didn't plan to. I didn't even think about it until it got quiet out there. Too quiet. The kind that makes you hear your own blood. By noon, the ridge was swallowed in a pewter sky, and the wind had that high tin whistle in the dead pines. I had my orange tape fluttering on branches every dozen yards, just me and the crunch of my boots and a distant creek that seemed to breathe in and out. The first odd thing was a stack of stones under a hemlock, not a cairn someone would build for fun, but careful. A flat rock on 3 round ones, a little altar to nothing. I walked around it. I didn't touch it. I kept working. Around 3, I found the old logging road the maps promised. No more than 2 wheel ruts swallowed by leaf litter and moss. A deer crossed ahead of me without looking up. It moved like it belonged, and I didn't. I checked my phone and got nothing. No bars, no weather, no time somehow. The woods had a way of taking the clock and pocketing it. I wish I could say I whistled to test the old woman's warning. Truth is, I did it without thinking. I had this dumb habit from childhood, a 2-note thing my dad taught me to call the dog. It slipped out of me as natural as breathing. The notes echoed down the hollow and came back sugar-sweet and bent a little by the trees. It made me smile. I did it again. I don't know why. The answer came from far off and too high in the pitch. It matched my 2 notes, then stretched the last one like a mouth that didn't know the shape of a smile. I froze. Maybe it was a bird. Maybe it was a kid. Maybe it was my own echo, I told myself. But the second time it answered, it was closer. The third time, it was close enough I could tell it wasn't up in the canopy. It was ground level. It was something that stood where I stood, only a dozen trees back. I tried to laugh, but my throat didn't know how. "All right," I said, too loud. "Very funny." Nothing moved. The leaves didn't even shiver. I took out my knife and held it, not because a blade would help me, but because hands feel stupid when they're empty and scared. I turned slow. The woods behind me were all the same. Hemlock, oak, a slick stone shaped like a skull. Shadows moving only because the clouds did. Then it whistled again, right to my left, 5 feet in the brush. It did my 2 notes, and I heard my breath hitch between them. Not the thing's breath, mine, like it was replaying what I had given it. I stepped back and my heel sank into a hollow log and broke through, the rotten wood grabbing my ankle like a hand. I yanked free and stumbled, and that broke whatever spell held me still. I ran for the old road. I ran stupid. My tape caught on rhododendron and pulled free with a snap like a twig breaking in a mouth. The road spat me into a small clearing that didn't look like a blessing. There was a shack there, old plank board silvered to bone, a porch slump-shouldered and a door hanging by the top hinge. I thought of snakes and raccoons and tetanus shot needles, but I also thought of walls between me and the brush. I pushed inside and the smell hit me. Old dirt, wet paper, and something sweet and spoiled like a bucket of apples gone bad. I pulled the door as best I could and jammed a broken chair under the knob. The light in there was the kind that tricks your eyes into seeing movement. Dust swirled and wrote my name in letters I didn't like. I stood quiet and listened. I could hear the creak. I could hear my heart fall out of sync and try to climb my throat. And then I heard feet on the porch boards. They didn't creak right. Heavy in the heel, too light in the toes, like something learning to walk. "Hey," a voice said through the door, and it was my voice. "You okay in there?" I didn't answer. Old rules are old for a reason. The voice tried again, softer. "Please, let me in." Then it pressed its mouth to the crack by the latch and whistled my 2 notes. Perfect, from an inch away. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted iron. The whole door seemed to hold its breath with me. The wood around the latch was soft, dented and shiny from fingers that had tested it too many times. It spoke again in my voice, softer than the first time. "Please, it's getting cold." A thumb slid into the crack and felt along the inside edge like it was blind and learning how doors worked. The nail rasped the wood. The chair under the knob creaked. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I let my lungs burn. When I finally had to breathe, I did it slow through my nose, gentle as a snake tasting air. On the inside wall, scratched in with a nail or a knife, was one word over and over: hush. It crawled across the boards, not neat, like someone wrote it while shaking and looking up every few seconds. In the far corner, a rope hung down through a hole in the ceiling where a loft used to be. Tied to the rope were clumps of dark hair, little bones, buttons, and a rusted thimble. Old mountain charms for keeping something out or in. They hadn't worked. "Open up," it said next, and this time it used a different voice. It was an old woman's voice, dry and kind, like the one at the bait shop. "You don't want to be alone out here." I slid my boot heel against the floor inch by inch until I could see through a slit in the planks by the doorframe. The porch was only a few feet of dark, and the thicket beyond it was darker, a tunnel of rhododendron leaves glossy with damp. I couldn't see a person. I saw movement like shadow on shadow, like something on the porch that had no edges until it leaned just enough to catch a gray smudge of light. It was tall. The part of it nearest the crack was a cheek that didn't look like skin. It looked like wet bark peeled thin. The mouth, what it pressed to the gap, was wrong, stretched at the edges like it never learned where to stop. The smell of sweet rot poured in as it breathed. I thought of that stack of stones under the hemlock, the flat rock on 3 round ones. An altar or a warning? I thought of names carved into sandstone in the little cemetery on the way in. Names that had stopped being said out loud because folks learned it was better not to wake them. The latch lifted a hair. The chair took that weight and squealed. I backed away on the balls of my feet, eyes on the dark, and felt along the wall for a window. There was one, but it was boarded from the inside with thin slats nailed crisscross. Someone had done it quick and ugly. The nails were bent. Through the gaps I saw the slope fall away, and beyond it, the silver thread of the creek. "Please," it said, and now it tried a boy's voice. "I can't find my dog." The 2-note whistle followed. My notes. My hitch halfway through. My breath pasted on its mouth like something stolen and worn. I took out my knife and slid the blade under the first board. Each nail screamed when it came loose. I flinched like the noise would bring a hand through the door. Outside, the porch boards flexed. Steps moved left, then right, slow, thoughtful. The voice went quiet. Leaves hissed against each other. I pried the second board, then the third, sweat cold in my shirt. When I got enough space, I shouldered through. Splinters scraped my neck, and my jacket stuck for a second on a nail that had a piece of cloth already on it, like it had been grabbing at people for years. I dropped into wet ferns. My knees vanished in moss. I didn't look back. I moved downhill, zigzagging as quiet as I could, trying to keep my feet from slapping the ground. The creek got louder, a low rush that felt like breath in a giant throat. Behind me, something stepped into the grass and didn't hurry. It matched my angle. It kept a kind of distance that felt intelligent. Orange tape fluttered on a branch to my left. It was mine, the same knot I tie without thinking. I let out a stupid, small sound before I could stop it. More tape hung ahead, more than I had put up, extra pieces placed just wrong, leading not down to the creek, but across the slope and then back in a lazy curl toward the shack. I tore one down as I passed and stuck it in my pocket like stealing it would help. At the creek, I slid into the water and bit my lip against the cold. The stones were slick and round under my boots. I crouched behind a shelf of rock that made a shallow cave. Water covered the sound of my breath. My teeth chattered and I pressed my jaw tight until it hurt. The woods on the far bank went quiet. No birds, no wind. Then a whistle came from upstream, thin and easy. And then another from downstream, lower, like it was standing in both places at once, and testing which one would make me move. I put my mouth in the water and blew out every bit of air I had. Then I held. The ache came fast. My chest bucked. I lasted long enough to think I might do it, and then my body betrayed me. I came up and dragged in a breath that sounded like a sob. A hand, or something like a hand, brushed the moss above my head. The rock gave a little shower of grit into my hair. "There you are," it said, and it said it in my voice with that stupid laugh I make when I'm nervous. I bolted. I didn't look where I put my feet. I slipped on a flat stone and skinned my palms and kept going up the other bank, through laurel, through a blackberry thicket that stitched my legs with 100 needles. The old cemetery stones showed up like teeth in the brush. I stumbled between them and the world got different. The air felt still and old. There were jars on a flat stone, nails, coins, a black ribbon in a knot. I stood in the middle and turned, and it stood just outside the edge where the grave started, head tipped like a dog trying to understand. It didn't step over. It didn't have to. It whistled twice, long and sweet, then took up a tune I didn't know, a hill song with no words that still made my skin crawl. It paused and said soft, "Open up," and I felt it inside my teeth. After a time I don't remember. My legs found the road and then the gate and then my truck. I don't remember starting it. I don't remember how I passed the bait shop. I remember only the smell in the cab, apples gone wrong and wet leaves, and an orange ribbon tied to my rear view like a joke. I ripped it down at a stoplight the next day and burned it in a coffee can. The smoke made a thin, high whine. I don't whistle anymore. I keep these windows shut when the wind sings. But sometimes at night when the house is quiet, something presses its lips to the gap where the door doesn't meet the frame just right. It does my 2 notes. Then it does the next 2 I've never taught it. And once, when I rolled over to face the wall and hold my breath, I felt a warm, sweet breath on my ear from inside the room, and a voice that sounded like me said, "Careful as a kindness. Please let me in." People in our county say they still hear a bell on humid nights from a church that isn't there anymore. They say the kudzu ate it 3 summers back, all at once like a quilt tossed over a sleeping body. I used to think that was just a way of saying folks forgot about a place. Then I went up there to take pictures for the Historical Society, and I learned vines can make a sound like prayer if they wrap tight enough. It sat past a rutted track and a cattle gate with no cattle behind it, half a mile below a ridge where the wind always smelled like water. Kudzu draped the power lines in big green curtains and turned fence posts into fat green men. When I cut the truck, it was like somebody turned up the volume on the world. Cicadas, a creek, the soft hiss of leaves rubbing together, never quite still. The air felt sweet in my mouth, but there was a copper taste underneath, like a penny on the tongue. I brought a machete, a little handsaw, and a spiral notebook. The society wanted pictures and a list of what could be saved. Windows, pews, the bell if it had not fallen. I hadn't planned to go inside. I told myself I would just take a look, maybe mark a few things, and come back with help. That lie felt good until I saw the steeple shape under the green. It was a bend in the kudzu like a bowed head. It made me feel watched. The first swing of the machete shocked my arm. The vine wasn't soft. It was rope thick and tight with water and life. Sap splashed the back of my hand and ran sticky down to my wrist. It smelled like apples and old cellar. It tingled. Leaves slid over leaves with tiny dry sounds like pages turning all at once. The more I cut, the more that sound gathered until I had to stop and listen to be sure it was not a voice. The white clapboard showed in slices. A window blinked at me from behind the green, stained glass of a lamb curled by a shepherd's feet. The lamb's eye was a circle of dark glass, and the shepherd's staff had a long green vein of kudzu pressed right against it, as if the picture had grown a vein while it slept. I touched the glass with my knuckle. It was warm. The door was half a door now, a plank weeping black around the nails. Kudzu had braided over it like hands, wrist thick and finger thin. 1,000 little tendons crossed to hold the shape shut. It took me a dozen cuts to get through, and each cut made that page-turning sound rise and fall. When I put my shoulder to the wood, something let go with a wet peel. The smell hit me like a room full of damp coats and old breath. I stepped inside and the door brushed my back like a person passing close. The light came green through the vines, so everything inside looked underwater. The floor sighed under me, boards soft with rot and covered in moss like hair. Pews leaned at odd angles under the weight of vines that had come down from the windows and up through the floor, meeting in the middle and twining. Songbooks sat open where leaves had pushed them that way. Some pages were stuck to the vines. The print bled out in little runnels and stained the leaves like ink veins. A bulletin board hung crooked on the wall with tacks still in it. The paper on it had gone the color of tea. I could read the last line if I leaned close. It said, "Revival, Wednesday, bring a covered dish." The date was 3 summers ago. There was a single dead wasp under the tack. Its legs were caught in a skin of clear sap that had gone hard like glass. I heard the bell rope before I saw it. It wasn't a rope anymore. It was a carpet of vine going up through a dark hole, a green twist that pulsed slow like a throat swallowing. Every time it did, the bell above made a soft, tired knock. Not a full ring, more a reminder. One of the vines had grown smooth from many hands. I ran my fingers along it and felt warmth under the skin, like blood moving. I told myself it was just a plant and wind. Then something brushed my ankle. It wasn't a snake, though my brain shot that word into my mouth like a shout. It was kudzu, a small tip of it, curious as a cat, tapping my boot toe. It left a dab of sap on the leather. I wiped it off and my fingers went numb for a second, like the feeling you get when your foot sleeps and wakes up wrong. At the altar, The Bible was a green block, leaves fused around it in a tight weave, but someone had cut a slit down the middle like a mouth. Inside the slit, the pages were wet and brown. A thin vine lay in there between the paper like a bookmark. When I leaned, the slit widened a little, and the vine lifted its tip toward me. The page made a wet whisper as it slipped free. I heard humming then, low and dead simple, the sound a congregation makes before words start. It wasn't in my ears. It was in the floorboards. It came up through my boots from wherever the roots had gone. It rolled through my bones so I felt it in my teeth. The pews creaked like people moving to stand. Behind the pulpit there was a square in the floor with a ring set in it, a trapdoor to the crawl space or a cellar. The ring had green around it, but not much. Something wanted it clear. I told myself to leave, but my hands did not listen. I pulled. The door lifted heavy and wet, and a breath of air came up that was cooler and sweet like crushed leaves over old meat. A living green glow rose under me, like cold swamp light. I leaned in with my headlamp and saw depth that didn't make sense. Vines hung like ropes. They moved, slow and pleased, rubbing each other so the hum got louder. There were shapes down there that were not roots. They were round and pale where the light hit. They looked like jars. They looked like bowls. They looked like the tops of skulls. I tried to step back, and a smooth green rope slipped around my ankle and drew tight. It pulled with a patient strength, not a yank, more like a hand that knows you will come if it keeps pressure. My shin clipped the edge of the open square. I hit the pulpit with my shoulder and tasted dust. The glow under the floor pulsed once like a sleeping thing that heard its name. The hum rolled up my bones, slow and sure, and the bell above gave a soft knock in answer. I grabbed the vine with both hands. It felt warm, not like a plant should, and slick where the sap beaded. The skin under my fingers had a nap to it, faint like an animal's tongue. When I dug my heels in and pulled, it tensed and then played out an inch, letting me think I might win. That lie felt mean. The machete lay on the front pew where I set it. I lunged and got it, almost falling forward into the square. I chopped down at the green around my ankle, careful not to take my own skin. The blade bit. Sap splashed. It smelled sweet at first. Then there was a meat note under it that turned my stomach. My calf went numb in a sting that crept up like cold water. The cut vine flinched in my hands like a muscle, and I heard the hum falter as if a choir had missed a note and caught it again. Another vine found my wrist like a polite stranger asking me to sit. It wrapped once, twice, and the tip pressed my pulse. The lace of smaller tendrils laid themselves along my palm, matching the lines there like it was reading me. In the slit Bible, the pages shifted. The green tongue inside slid deeper and the mouth of the book closed slow, as if biting down on the last word of a prayer. I leaned out over the open square. The depth below refused the headlamp in a way I hated. The light soaked into green, came back fogged. Shapes moved, not because of wind, but because they were always moving. I saw the round things I thought were bowls slide and become the tops of skulls, and then become jars, and then become something that remembered skulls and jars and learned those shapes for me. Threads crossed and uncrossed, weaving tighter like a basket around a heartbeat I could not see. The hum turned soft and sure and took on a tune I knew without wanting to. I had sung it as a kid when the air inside felt like hot rain. It was the kind that asks you to come just as you are. It scraped up something old in me, something that wanted to be held and told. It was good. My throat went tight. The vine around my wrist squeezed, not to hurt, but to keep time. "Let go," I said, and my voice sounded wrong in there, small and hollow like a moth tapping glass. I sawed at the ankle vine with the little handsaw. Teeth rasped, fibers squealed. The bell rope pulsed hard and the bell above rang for real, a cracked, soft ring like a spoon on a jar. The sound made the leaves clap against the windows, and the stained glass lamp lifted a tremble of light in its eye that made me feel watched. The saw bit through, and the vine let go in a rush. My foot shot back. The cuff of my boot stuck in the green's mouth and twisted. I left the boot behind without thinking and felt the wet of the floor through my sock like a cold kiss. I hopped up onto the pulpit. The boards broke soft and held. The vine around my wrist unrolled itself in a show of good manners and slid back down, tipping its end up like it was tasting the air I left. The trapdoor ring scraped as the door tried to close, slow, steady, as if to say, "It will be here when I am ready again." The Bible mouth opened a slit just enough to show a line of black print slick inside. I ran down the aisle. The pews leaned into me, leaves brushing my sleeves like hands in a service line. The bulletin board on the wall put off a little shine like a fisheye. "Revival, Wednesday, bring a covered dish," the paper said again, and the words curled at the edges as sap eased out through the fibers dot by dot like sweat. I put my shoulder to the door. It peeled away from the frame with that wet sound, and the vines that had braided over it came loose one after the other, snapping like string. Outside, the green had shifted. The path I cut was already blurring. Leaves turned toward me like faces. The air stuck to my lungs. The bell rang again behind me, and something in the sound made the kudzu lift as a whole, like a body taking a deep breath. I hacked through, not clean, just enough to make gaps. The vines reached with those small, polite tips, tapping my pant leg, my belt, the hem of my shirt, asking me to come back, promising it would be better if I did. At the truck, a rope of green had draped itself across the hood and found the mirror. I chopped it free. Sap smeared across the windshield like bad weather, and the wipers made it worse. I drove by feel until the gravel let go, and the blacktop reached up under my tires. I didn't look in the rear view until the road straightened. When I did, the tree line was just tree line again. The bell stopped. That night my ankle burned. A faint green ring rose under the skin where the vine had held me, thin as a bruise in the shape of a wedding band. When I pressed it, it pulsed once. My teeth ached steady with the hum. I slept with the TV on to push the sound back, but it found spaces the TV didn't fill. In the morning, a tendril thin as a string lay on the doormat, fresh and bright, as if someone had left a ribbon for me. On Tuesday, my inbox pinged. A message had gone out from my account to the Historical Society list. The subject line was, "Revival Wednesday, bring a covered dish." The body held a picture I did not take. It showed the church under green from the angle of the choir loft, lit like a heart. The bell rope looked smooth from many hands. The square in the floor was open. I tried to cancel it. I tried to call and say the road was bad and the place unsafe. My voice broke on the word unsafe and came back soft and patient, like a person asking a favor. When I hung up, the house hummed once through the boards. A leaf tip peeped from the seam by the back door, where the light never quite reaches. Wednesday came humid and loud. At 6, a car door shut in my drive and then another on the road below. The bell started to ring from far away, cracked and kind, and the ring came up through my ankle like a heartbeat answering. Folks around here say the old mine up on Gray Slope breathes after dark. They mean it like a joke until they lower their voice. They say if you stand by the opening on a wet night, the air pushes you and then pulls, slow as a sleeping chest. I grew up hearing it from uncles and tired men on bar stools. I never cared much until I heard it for myself. Now I sleep with a towel under my door. It was after a storm, the kind that sits on the ridge and grinds. The county asked me to check the bat gate, make sure it hadn't fallen in. I do little jobs like that because I have a key to most of the old forest roads and a habit of saying yes. My dad cut coal when I was small. He died with a lung that sounded like rain. I told myself this was just a gate check, not a walk into the grief I keep in a jar. The road up was slick clay and fern fingers. My truck slid twice. I parked before the last bend and walked the rest with a headlamp, a little gas meter that beeps when the air turns bad, and a coil of rope I always carry because it feels like a plan. The woods were wet enough to drip off the trees in threads. The mountain smelled like soaked ash and iron. The mine showed itself as a black mouth in a bank of shale, framed in old timbers, the color of old teeth. The gate was a grill of rusted bars welded across the opening to keep people like me out. Kudzu hadn't found it yet. The storm had freed a skin of rock from above. Shards lay at the threshold like plates from a broken cupboard. I set my hand to one of the bars and felt a faint pulse through the metal. It wasn't my heart. The mine did a slow exhale that warmed my face, then pulled back, cooler, damp, with a slick of sulfur sweetness underneath. "Okay," I said aloud, just to hear a voice that wasn't the mountain. In and out. 5 minutes. The meter blinked a little green light. The rope slid around a stump and cinched to my belt. It is a dumb comfort, like the way a scared kid keeps a hand on the wall. I clicked the lamp and the beam pushed a tunnel into the black. The rails were still there, twin lines of dull metal that ran underwater and came up again. The drip had a rhythm. The roof timed its breaths with the mines like it was alive. On the wall just inside, someone had scratched a small word with a nail deep enough to scar the rock. It wasn't a prayer. It just said, "Quiet." The letters were full of dust like ash rubbed into a cut. I touched the cue with my thumb, then wiped my hand on my jeans. The dust smelled like wet paper and old battery. A step in, 2 steps. The air pressed my ears and then eased like I was riding an elevator my legs couldn't feel. Farther in, a crosscut opened to the right where a small room had been shot out. There were old timbers there, river-worn logs shored up like a rib cage. A lunch pail sat on a shelf made from a plank. It was the round kind with a dome lid. The metal had gone gray and bubbled. Inside it, something soft had dried into a shape like a hand. I shut it and put it back. I don't bring souvenirs out of holes. The meter gave one polite beep and then went quiet again. The flame trick I learned from my father came back to me. He would carry a candle in the dark instead of a meter and watch how the flame bent. I set a small camping lighter on the floor and flicked it. The flame leaned toward the inside like wind was pulling it. The mine did a slow inhale. The flame went to a straight little tongue, then leaned out at me as the mine exhaled a warm breath that smelled like coal smoke and damp wool. "See?" I said to nobody. "Just pressure." Something answered with a knock from far in, 3 taps even as a clap. Miners used to talk about little men in the walls who knocked before the rock shifts. I told myself that was just shale moving. I said it again when the knock came again. Closer, like feet walking on boards that aren't there. The rope at my hip tightened without moving. I looked down and saw slack go flat as if something inside had taken it in hand. I pulled back and got an inch. Then the mine inhaled and took that inch back. Slow. The feeling was like standing in surf and letting it have your ankles. I told myself to leave. My feet took me 5 yards deeper instead, into a section where the roof dipped low enough that I had to duck. The rails vanished under black water. The beam caught the belly of the space and made it small. On the roof, high and out of reach, were 2 handprints pressed into dust, fresh and neat, fingers spread as if someone had tried to push the rock up. The prints were my size. Coal dust makes everything the same color. That thought did not help. "Dad?" I said without meaning to. The word slipped out. I never call him that out loud. The mine exhaled and the breath that came out had a note in it. A steadied hum like a man singing soft to keep the roof from listening. My father used to do that on the long drives home, voice tired and sweet. The hum rolled through the timbers, so I felt it in my teeth. The meter stayed quiet. The rope crept across my belt with a sound like a small animal slipping through leaves. There was another crosscut to the left. I swung the beam and saw a shape against the back wall. A jacket hung there on a nail, blue denim stiff with salt. Like a ghost had taken it off and might come back for it. Under it sat a hard hat with a crack across the crown and a yellow sticker faded near white. My lamp made the sticker show a black shape that looked like 2 lungs. I stepped closer and my boot sank an inch into coal fines. When I pulled it up, the print I left behind filled with a slow shine like breath on glass. The mine inhaled, long and deep, and the lighter flame on the floor pulled thin, fought, and snuffed. The dark came in one piece, heavy. My beam fluttered like a moth inside a jar and went weak, then steadied, then dimmed again like something was drawing power with the air. I held still. The rope slid once more against my hip toward inside. The hum turned into words I almost knew. Then, from the black ahead, a warm breath leaned close to my face and drew mine in. It took my breath like a big hand over my mouth. The air that went into me was warm and wet, wrong sweet, with a touch of sulfur and damp wool. My headlamp shrank to a tired coin. The meter gave one weak chirp and went quiet, like it was holding its breath too. A voice rode that breath. It wasn't in my ear. It was a hum in my teeth that shaped itself into a word I already knew from the wall. It said, gentle and tired, quiet. Under it came my father's tune, the one he sang on late drives home. I tried to step back. The rope at my hip slid forward instead, smooth like a belt someone else was pulling. Coal fines hissed under my boot. The print I had left filled with a skin of water and trembled as the mine inhaled again. The buried rails gleamed like ribs under black. I swung the light toward the crosscut. The denim jacket on the nail moved softly like a man sighing inside it. The cracked hard hat beside it showed a faded sticker like two lungs. I reached the old lunch pail, popped the lid, and the brown pulp inside lifted once with the mine's breath. The hum thickened and wanted words. I think it said, hold it, keep it. I think it said my name the way my father did when he needed a wrench he could not reach. My throat answered before my brain did, a small sound I didn't mean. I timed myself to the breath. When the mine let air out, I slid one foot back and set it. When it pulled, I made myself narrow and held a timber, let the force pass through me like surf. It worked for a beat, then two. The beam faltered and steadied. The roof dipped low. I crouched. Dust brushed my hair and fell in a soft veil. Two handprints above me pressed deeper. Fingers sunk at the tips as if the rock had softened. I dropped the lighter without meaning to. It hit my boot and vanished into the black water with a small click. 3 even knocks came from ahead. The same 3 answered behind me. I told myself it was only rock settling. The sound was too neat. It felt like men telling each other, now. My rope slid again, not toward out, toward in, a polite hand at my belt inviting me to step. The gate bars showed at last, a darker dark in my beam, slick with breath. The air beyond them tasted like rain and leaves. I lunged and got both hands around the center bar. It felt like a rib. When the mine inhaled, the bar moved a hair in my grip. My line was tight, but the slack did not run out to daylight. It ran along the floor and up around a timber and back to me. The hitch had changed. It was tied in an old way I had not used since I was small. It was my father's knot, neat and sure. I unbuckled the belt and let the rope fall. I turned sideways and pressed my shoulder between 2 bars. Cold iron kissed my ribs. I waited for the exhale and pushed. When the inhale swelled, I blew everything out until stars pricked my eyes. I slid through and fell to wet leaves. The mine exhaled behind me like a big animal settling. Dust lifted from the bars and hung. I crawled up and pressed my hand to my chest, counting bones like a fool. My heart pounded then, slow as a clock, began to match a rhythm I could feel in the ground. I walked down with my lamp off, greedy for outside dark. My truck was a shape under alder. The seat sighed when I sank in. I drove home without music. That night the towel at my door lifted and lay down. The mirror fogged cold and a finger traced a word and left it. Quiet. I tried the couch. A soft hum rolled through the floor from the crawl space. It was my father's tune without words. The air by the vent smelled like coal smoke and damp wool. I put my cheek there like a child at a door and felt a warm breath answer steady as sleep. In the morning, my rope lay coiled on the mat inside, clean of mud, and smaller than it should be, as if it had spent the night tight in a chest. The meter in my bag chirped once and dimmed. Around midnight, 3 neat knocks came from under the floor. A warm breath drew mine in, and my father's voice in my mouth said, gentle and wrong, hold it, keep it. If you ever see antlers lying in a creek after a flood, leave them where the water put them. I know that now. At the time, I thought I had found something lucky. They were the whitest antlers I had ever seen, smooth as porcelain, bright even in shadow. I found them down behind my aunt's place where Big Laurel loops under a footbridge that has never held more than 3 people at once. It was early spring. The storm the night before had pulled half the bank into the channel and left a brown rind on the grass. The air smelled like wet bark and worms. Water limped through the shallows with that low chatter that sounds like a crowd speaking soft. I was there to pick trash out of the root snags. We do that after big water, so old cans and chicken wire done to catch a dog by the leg. The antlers were caught in a tangle of laurel branches midstream. No skull, no bone plate, just the whole rack, 10 points, white like a bleached shell, heavy enough that the current couldn't roll it. They didn't look chewed thin by mice the way most dead things do here. They looked new and wrong. Sunlight through the bare limbs fell on them like a hand. My first thought was, Christmas decoration. My second thought was, these will look good over the wood stove. I stepped into the water. It gripped my ankles like cold hands. Slippery stones rolled under my boots. When I reached the snag, a slick smell rose off the tangle, sweet like cut weeds gone bad. I grabbed the base of the antlers with both hands and yanked. They came free too easy, like they wanted to be held. The tines clinked against each other with a thin ring that didn't die right away. I told myself that was just sound bouncing off water and steel culvert. Up close, the antlers had no pits or scuffs. The tines were needle sharp. When I ran my thumb along one, a burr snagged my skin and left a short line of blood. The water lifted the red and carried it away like it had been waiting for it. I didn't like that thought, so I shoved the rack under one arm, sloshed back to the bank, and carried my prize up to the yard. My aunt was not home, and her dog did not like what I brought. Trigger is a soft yellow dog with a tail that knocks everything off low tables. He put his head down and growled from the dog part of his throat, no hair up, just a warning made of old instincts. He looked not at me, not at my hands, but at the air above the antlers, like something else was standing there holding them too. "All right," I said. "Fine. You don't have to like it." I set the rack on the porch to dry and went back for more trash. Each trip to the creek felt different now. The water sounded closer to words. Leaves that had clung to the bridge posts let go one by one and slapped the surface like hands. On the far bank, a deer track led down into the mud, 2 neat slots sharp as a stamp. There was no track coming out. By late afternoon, clouds stacked up purple over the ridge. I loaded the truck with rusted metal and old bottles and the framed white antlers on top like a crown. When I tied the rope, the antlers seemed lighter than they should have been. A low shiver went through the line as if someone on the other end had taken it in hand. On the ride home, a sweet smell filled the cab even with the window open, like fruit rotting in a bowl. That night I hung the antlers on a nail above the wood stove. The room looked right in an old-time way. The tines cast black ribs on the ceiling. I made a sandwich and fell asleep in the chair to the sound of the creek that runs behind my place, a smaller branch that talks even when the sky is bone dry. I woke at 2 to the sound of water inside, a small steady dripping from the hallway. I got up. The floor was dry. The sound moved ahead of me like a person. It led me to the front door. The bottom seam of the door was wet. A thin bead ran under and down onto the mat. On the mat sat a skinny fish, pale and small as my finger. It gaped like it had tried to say a word and brought up only air. Behind me, Trigger, who sleeps on my rug most nights, whined in his throat. He did not come into the hall. I lifted the fish and it folded on itself like wet paper. I took it to the sink and tossed it in the bowl. The water there rippled once like something had exhaled. Back in the living room, the antlers were wet. Drops gathered at the tips and fell onto the stovetop without a sizzle. It was not hot. I had not lit a fire. The smell in the room had changed to cold rock and leaf rot. Outside, the creek said my name. It did not say it like a person. It said it the way a place says a thing, over and over until your ear learns it. A vowel drawn too long, a soft note turned hard at the end. I stood at the window and the dark stood up to meet me, and in the middle of the yard, just at the edge of the little square of light, my porch throw something lifted a shape like a crown above the grass and turned it, slow tines tasting the air. and then the crown bent toward the door like a deer with no face had decided to come in. I froze. The porch steps clicked once like a hoof on wood. The door swelled and sighed against the frame the way wet boards do when seasons turn. The handle moved a hair and went still. The antlers above the stove tilted the smallest bit. It was like the nail had changed its mind about gravity. "Trigger," I said, "back." He did not need the word. He had already backed into the kitchen and tucked himself between the chair and the fridge. He did not bark. He breathed fast with his mouth closed, eyes on the door seam where the water shone. The smell in the room shifted to creek sour and cold leaves. A drop fell from a tine and hit the stove with a soft tap that sounded like bone on enamel. Outside, something scratched the paint in slow lines. Not a paw, not a hand. It was a careful tracing around where a lock would be if the lock were important. I took the rack down from the nail. My hands didn't like it. The bone was slick, not with water, but with a skin of something that made my fingers numb where it touched. The weight of it changed as I held it. First light as kindling, then heavy as wet stone. A burr on one tine nicked my wrist. The blood ran thin. The drop hung and didn't fall for a long second, then slid and vanished. A little warmth moved up the tine toward my palm, slow as a wick. "I'm taking them back," I told the door, which is a dumb thing to say to wood and water. "You can have them." The seam at the bottom let out another bead of creek water, clear as a tear. I opened the door slow, first a crack, then a hand's width. The night leaned in. The crown in the yard lifted, turned, and bowed the way deer do when they wonder if you are going to throw corn. It was taller than I had seen from the window. The tines were wrong, long, like they had one more inch than they should. There was no head under them. There was a darkness there the porch light could not push into. I stepped onto the porch. The boards were cold through my socks. The antlers in my hands tugged toward the yard, not down the steps, but sideways, like they wanted to find their partner by feel. I walked anyway. The grass bent under me and stayed bent, slow to rise, heavy with water that was not there a minute before. Every few steps the ground hummed in a way that felt like the word mine but meant creek, a slow pull and push in the dirt. At the footbridge, the water was higher than at dusk. It pushed, and then laid back, and then pushed again, steady as a lung. The crown shape stood midstream where the deeper cut runs under the sycamore roots. It did not splash. It did not sink. It stood like a person in a dream stands with no need to be held up by anything at all. I could not see what held the antlers up. I did not try hard to see. I went to the middle of the bridge. The boards had a slick of fresh moss that gave under my boots like skin. I knelt and set the white rack on the rail. The tines chimed against wood, a high, thin sound like forks banging together in a bucket. I worked the rope off my belt and looped it over the beams, trying to make a cradle. The rope drank water like it was thirsty. My hands shook. The antlers rolled toward the creek on their own and then stopped as if listening. "Take them," I said to the shape in the water. "Please." The crown tilted. A wind moved against my face that was not wind but the sense of something taking a breath. The rack in my hands pushed back, toward me, not hard, more like a dance partner asking for the next step. The burrs along the base pricked my palms and stung. A deep ache bloomed along my temples, dull and slow, like a headache starting from the outside in. For a second I had the sick thought that the antlers were not for the deer at all. They were looking for a head. The antlers lay in it like a child in a net. The water below lifted in a little mound under the bridge, like something big moving under a blanket. The rope went tight. The rail creaked. The bridge gave a sound I'd never heard from it, a low note like a bass string. The white rack slid an inch toward the water as if hands were on both sides now. My pocket knife stuck the first time I tried to open it. The blade had a smear on it from some old grease. My thumb slipped. I bit the edge with my teeth and pulled it open. I sawed the rope. The fibers fought, then gave. The antlers dropped and didn't splash. They eased down like a big chandelier being lowered from a church ceiling. The crown under the sycamore tilted to meet it. For a second, the two sets floated with their tips just touching. A sound came up, small and lonely, like a bottle blown across the mouth by wind. Then the white rack slid into the dark, slow as sleep. The crown in the creek bowed once and went with it, down under, white fading like a moth falling through smoke. The water leveled. The smell of sweet rot scaled back. I stood up and staggered. The night felt bigger and emptier, like when a train passes and leaves a shape behind it in the air. When I got back to the porch, Trigger met me with his nose to my knee and his whole body wagging so hard it hurt to see. We went inside. The stove was dry. The nail hole over it was empty. The air had the good smell of my house again, dust and old coffee and dog. I slept bad and woke worse. At dawn, I made coffee and stood at the sink. The bowl had drained itself sometime in the night. A scale lay stuck to the porcelain, pearly and thin. On the wall over the stove, 2 little wet ovals had dried to pale stains where the antlers used to hang, like hands had held there and bled a little water into the paint. I told myself it was over. That day stayed clean. The next did not. When the rain came again at the first real downpour, the hallway started to drip in a line, not from the roof, but from the door seam, same as before. On the mat were 4 wet hoof prints the size of my palm, pointing into the house and stopping 2 steps in. That night, lying in bed, I watched the ceiling, and the lamp throw 2 shadows like white branches on plaster where nothing hung. I put my hand to my temples and found small bruises there in the shape of tines that have not grown yet. Outside, the creek said my name, and then a word I did not know, and the house, very softly, said it back.